Well, things are changing so fast that it's hard to think about what the future might look like. But pause for a second and force yourself. What will the world look like in, say, 10 years, 15 years, 50 years? Well, the outlines are pretty clear. If the people who run things, powerful forces, and by that we mean very specifically the US government, the Chinese government, the UN, if they have their way, there will be a lot less private property, a lot less privacy for the average person. And for the average person, a lot of really big decisions will be made not individually, but by machines. So that's clearly the direction we're going. The question is, who wants that? And the answer is very, very few people. That's dystopian, doesn't quite capture it. That's horrifying. That's a nightmare. And so if you had to bring about that future with the consent of the governed, as in a democracy, that would be impossible because no one will ever want that. It's too ugly and sad. It's clearly anti-human. It's a dead end. So how do you do it? Well, you only have two options. You can use force, just put a gun in people's faces and say, do this, accept this, or I'll kill you. But that's messy and hard, and it requires a lot of guns. It also requires a kind of muscular attitude, an aggression, not just a passive aggression. Probably not going to happen. Or you can do something else. You can make people want it. That's very different from convincing them. There's almost no effort to convince you of anything anymore, in case you haven't noticed. They've totally given up on argument as a means of reaching some kind of mutual consent. It doesn't exist anymore. But they can instead make you want it. Well, how would they do that? Well, the fastest way to do that would be by, say, changing your brain. Is that happening? Well, you have to kind of wonder. What was COVID, by the way? It was the other day, it feels like. We haven't really talked about what that was. It wasn't just some random virus. It probably wasn't even just a lab leak accidentally. This was a bioweapons lab run by the Chinese government, paid for in part by the US government, and it went global. But it really went to the West. That's the truth. To the English-speaking world, to Europe. And it seemed to have changed people. So what's going on here? Is something going on here? And if so, what can you do about it? How do you preserve the sovereignty of your own mind? Maybe that's the most important question. Very few people are thinking about this seriously. Lots of people are speculating about it, but very few scientists are looking at the specifics of how this might be done and what you might do about it. In fact, there's really just one that we're aware of, and we're about to meet him. He is German. His name is Michael Nehls. He's a medical doctor, a physician. He's a molecular geneticist. And he's written what seems to be an amazing new book called The Indoctrinated Brain, How to Successfully Fend Off the Global Attack on Your Mental Freedom. And we are honored to have him join us now. Dr. Nehls, thank you very much.
I'm very honored to be here. Thank you very much. Actually, it honors my work.
Well, and we're honored to have you. So I sort of non-technically and maybe grossly generalized, summarized this idea, but I'd like you to bring some science to it, that maybe COVID, not just the vax, but the virus itself, changed the way people think and feel about themselves and understand themselves. Do you think that's possible?
Yeah, it's absolutely possible. And it was already shown with SARS-CoV-1, the predecessor of SARS-CoV-2.
Yes.
It was published already 2007, 2008, papers which showed that the spike protein itself is capable of doing something which we call neuroinflammation. That means kind of a cytokine storm in the brain. And I've worked on this issue for the last 10 to 15 years, actually published a paper, Unified Theory of Alzheimer's Disease, which is Alzheimer's. Most people think it's the cause is age, but the real cause of Alzheimer's is actually neuroinflammation and our lifestyle. And so the reason age is correlated to it is just because it takes decades to develop disease. But neuroinflammation can be caused by many things. It can be caused by excessive fear, by fear-mongering. Neuroinflammation can be caused by bacteria, by viruses, by infection, chronic infections.
Yes.
So it was shown that in order that the hippocampus, it's our autobiographical memory center, which is the center where Alzheimer's starts, needs to be functional, something which we call adult hippocampal neurogenesis, a permanent production of new nerve cells, which have many, many functions we need to talk about. They are essentially our mental immune system. And if this production is essentially shut down, then our mental immune system breaks down and we are free for everything. I mean, we can be conquered, and we would even accept it. And so I was working on this mental immune system and how
So you're describing a physical,
it's physical.
Exactly, it's physical. This is not emotional. This is not the product of propaganda. You're saying that the way that your brain functions as a physical matter can be changed to make you more controllable.
Emotions essentially change the way the brain works, and strong emotions, fear, for example, particularly in a situation where your mental immune system is down, meaning that your psychological resilience is down. It leads to a very strong effect in the brain, kind of a neurotoxic effect, leakage of molecules out of the neurons, which are recognized by immune cells in the brain. And this recognition leads to an activation of an immune response, a very strong immune response, activating cytokines, pro-inflammatory cytokines, and they attack the hippocampus, our autobiographical memory center, shutting down essentially many, many functions like, for example, curiosity, like, for example, psychological resilience. It drops, meaning that everything that happens leads to an increased rate of depression. And it shuts down, which I've shown recently and which I've put in my book, it shuts down our ability to think.
You're describing what we're seeing all around us. I have to say, this proves nothing, but I thought it was interesting. I got COVID a couple of years ago, and not the worst sickness I've ever had, but it had the most profound emotional effect for a couple of days. I've never feel depressed. I've never felt that depressed as I did when I had it. I felt defeated. I didn't expect that. I've never heard anybody say that that was a side effect of COVID. Is it?
It is, yeah. So when in 2007, 2008, the first papers came out on how SARS-CoV-1, specifically the spike protein, is able to activate the neuroinflammatory process, shutting down the production of these nerve cells in the hippocampus in our autobiographical memory center, the consequences are clear. In the short term, you are prone to depression. In the long term, you're actually prone to Alzheimer's if you don't change the course of events. Of course, in that time, the spike protein was not, I think, able to actually enter the brain, and they changed that. So when I was actually almost laughing because it was so deeply depressing in a way, so my reaction was kind of funny. I said, when the Nobel Prize was given in 2023 to this mRNA program bringing the spike protein into humans by genetic engineering, the two researchers who got the Nobel Prize actually said in an interview, well, we came up with this idea 15 years ago. So when you look back 15 years ago, it was clear that the spike protein is a bioweapon against the brain, particularly the part of the brain which I call our mental immune system, which is the very important part that makes us human, which allows us to think, which allows us to be curious, which allows us to explore the world and develop a culture, everything. So the spike protein essentially attacked humankind, the very basis of humans. Of course, at that time, the spike protein was kind of, not very dangerous because it was an external inflammation outside the brain, which, of course, is transmitted to the brain. That's known. And so we had an indirect neuroinflammation. If you really want to attack the brain, you have to get the spike protein into the brain. That's really dangerous. And so two things happened actually here. So first of all, they changed the SARS-CoV-1 into SARS-CoV-2 by including this furin cleavage site into the spike genome, in the gene of the spike protein. So if you insert this cleavage site, you create essentially a target for a molecular scissor that all our cells have, which we call furin. If furin cleaves the spike protein two halves, we have two subunits, S1 and S2. And the S1 subunit is the outer part, interacts with the same receptor that is also our fear receptor, our danger receptor on the immune cells. And that triggers essentially a cascade of events, which at the end leads to an output of enormous amounts of pro-inflammatory cytokines, each of one of them, each individual of them, the whole cascade of different ones, interleukin 1, interleukin 6, TNF-alpha, interleukin 17, whatever, all of them were shown to shut down the production of new nerve cells in the hippocampus, which we require for curiosity, psychological resilience, and our ability to think.
And those are the effects of the vax, of the mRNA vaccine.
Not only the vax, the virus itself.
I think you may be, I mean, it's a lot to take in, but you may be answering the question, why after the mRNA vax was shown not to stop transmission, did governments continue to push it on their populations?
Absolutely. They pushed it even on unborn children, when they,
yes.
Women who are pregnant, young children. So these are all different pieces of a puzzle I couldn't understand. And only when I realized it's not about health, it's not about not even money, it's about conquering the human mind, then it totally made sense suddenly. And all the pieces of the puzzle fell together seamless. And I had a picture in front of me which clearly showed what they are up to. And that is really to undermine the human ability to think. And it's even worse than that. It's even worse than that, which I show in the book, because we need this production of these new nerve cells, not only for curiosity, psychological resilience, or our ability to think. They are also necessary for memorizing and retrieving new memories. So if you shut down this production and force the hippocampus to memorize all these different stories, these fear-mongering narratives, then these narratives will enter the brain. They will be memorized in the hippocampus, but for a cost. They will override pre-existing memories. There's no other way around it, because you have no production of new nerve cells allowing new memories formed without harming previous ones. So what happens is you override with the narratives, with the fear narratives, with the technocratic narratives, you override your pre-existing memories, your individuality, or your personality, and change it.
If intentional, this would be the most evil thing ever done.
Absolutely. Absolutely. When I wrote the book, my wife actually is the person who first reads it and corrects it. And she almost got a heart attack doing that. I mean, she had really problems reading chapter by chapter because the evil that the book reveals is traumatic.
So you spent your entire life within science.
Yeah.
And so the people who did this or who made it possible are, in some cases, I'm sure people you know, but certainly the kind of people you know.
Yeah.
How hard was it for you to reach the conclusion that those people were responsible for something so evil?
For me, it was extremely difficult to accept because the last 15 years I spent my life essentially, I wrote actually 4 or 5 national bestsellers in Germany, and now they are going to be translated in English because this book is now making its way in the English world, of course, and is, so to speak, puts the others will trail behind it. But I spent the last 15 years trying to convince people that Alzheimer's is not something you can't avoid when you get older. But it was not about Alzheimer's. It was about something else. Alzheimer's is just the tip of an iceberg of a society whose mental immune system is not functioning. The cause of Alzheimer's is the inability to produce these new nerve cells over several decades. That's the cause of Alzheimer's. So you have to reactivate this production to prevent it. But since it takes decades, the cases of Alzheimer's are just the tip of an iceberg of a society whose mental immune system is down. Give you another example. If the psychological resilience is down because the production of these nerve cells is down, then the likelihood increases that you get depression. And depression became the #1 disease in 2017. Actually, the WHO said in 2019 is now the most common disease on Earth. #1. So if you realize depression is inversely correlated to the production of these new nerve cells, that means in 2019, even maybe in 2017, the mental immune system of the human society was down it was at its lowest level. We were easy to conquer. We were easy to accept what was happening.
So for those of us who've noticed that people who've taken the mRNA vax and boosters seem different psychologically.
Yeah.
We're not imagining that.
Yeah, no. It's That's what's really happening. You see, people who are not who have not a high production of these cells in the hippocampus, they act normally during the day. On a normal situation, they do whatever humans do, and you don't realize it. I saw that actually even in the part of my of people I know that when I saw them at parties, we could talk about everything which is trivial. But as soon as you start to talk about something more difficult, that was before 2020, you realize they don't want to put their brain in a working mode. They just avoided these topics, and these very people who are not interested in really thinking were the ones who actually took the shots very quickly. Because you have to see the mental immune system, as I already counted off. Curiosity is lacking. And the other side of the coin of curiosity is psychological resilience, because being curious, meaning you enter a new space, new thoughts, and everything that's new is per se potentially dangerous.
Yes.
So you have to have a high psychological resilience to enter this new space. So if both is down, curiosity and psychological resilience, then you accept everything. And particularly if something comes with a lot of fear, oh, you could die, your family could die, everything is very, very dangerous. Then you fall back to I would say cortical reflexes, like something that is inborn in us, behavior that's inborn. And one behavior that's inborn, of course, in humans is and that's natural, is if there's a danger, you go into the group. You don't try to be isolated. You follow the group. And if people tell you the group is going to take this vaccine, then everybody runs and I want to have it too. You don't think, you just follow the crowd.
The effects of spike proteins on the human brain, just to be clear about what I think you said, were well known by the time COVID was loosed on the world and the mRNA vaccines.
Well, I didn't discover that. I just used the papers and the publications which were out there to come to this conclusion. And if I can read these papers, everybody else can do that. They are public. It's not like it's hidden information. So that was clear. You see, when the virus broke out, by whatever reason, it was long not clear to me, and there's no eyewitness who tells us, yeah, we actually did it on purpose.
Yes.
And everybody knew that the virus, based on this furin cleavage site, produces a spike version that can enter the brain and has all these detrimental effects on our mental health. So that was really bad. And even if that was not on purpose, what was clearly on purpose was the mRNA injection program. That was on purpose. It was forced. And here the people who actually forced people psychologically to undergo this injection, they had a choice. They had many, many choices. They had the choice, for example, to change the mRNA that it doesn't contain the cleavage site, that the spike protein is not able to enter the brain. They could have had another choice. They could have taken proteins instead of mRNA, which is modified to stay long in our body, which doesn't make any sense for getting an immune response, and that doesn't make any sense at all. They had another choice. They could have taken not the spike protein, which is dangerous. They could have taken, for example, the nucleocapsid, which is another part of the virus, which is not dangerous to us, and actually was proven to give us a very good immunity if you have a natural infection. So it was proposed. There are papers out there in 2020 proposing that, and it was ignored. And then the mRNA itself is dangerous because you have to package it, because it's not very stable.
Yes.
You have to package, and the packaging itself is dangerous. It's very pro-inflammatory, meaning again attacking the brain because it causes neuroinflammation. And in addition to that, it was shown that a large portion of it, actually of the mRNA, packaged with the lipid nanoparticles, can actually enter the brain. Lipid nanoparticles were actually produced or invented to enter the brain.
So that, ask you to stop it for a second, that when the injections were first rolled out, I remember reading someone say, actually, this could cross the blood-brain barrier.
Yeah, sure. That's why it
And
was
that
developed.
person was shouted down immediately. You're a conspiracy nut. You're crazy. I think we now admit that that's the case.
No, it was already published by the European Medical Association actually published a paper showing that 4% of the circulating, mRNA can enter the brain. And what was shocking to me actually is the way they did the injections itself. That even that is revealing. If you really want to make sure that a large proportion is circulating, you have to make sure that you inject it in a way that the likelihood that it enters the bloodstream is higher. And when I was trained as a medical doctor, I learned that if I have to give an injection that has to stay at the injection place,
Yes.
you actually draw a little bit blood. And if there's blood to be drawn, you are in a vein or in an
Yes.
artery or something. So you change the position of the needle tip.
To inject it into fat.
Yeah, in the fat or in the muscle,
Yes.
but not in the vein. But here there was clearly the indication, or there was actually the rule. No, with this one we have to inject it without drawing the blood first, without checking if it's in the bloodstream. And that's the major reason actually why, for example, young adults who usually muscular, doing sport, had so often myocarditis, even deadly myocarditis, because they have the big veins, so they get the full dose. That's the explanation.
So you believe, based on the way it was designed, manufactured, and administered, that it was intentional, that the people who did this wanted it to get into the brain?
Well, everything is this whole list of what I just given you, of things which could have been different if there were no intention, was not even considered, or if people proposed it was negated. So I think, let's put it this way. In my book, I only bring all the scientific evidence. I bring all the pieces of the puzzle. I show how the pieces of the puzzle can be put together seamless. And so it's very likely it's the correct picture. But at the end of the day, I'm not accusing anybody. I'm just, let's say, the prosecutor, saying this might be the case. I have my personal opinion, but at the end, it's the reader who is the jury.
I was interested to notice where this was administered, these shots. Mm-hmm. So China, no. I don't think China forced its population to take the mRNA shots. Is that correct?
It was only a testing ground, essentially. And
right.
Of course, people were fearful enough. Actually, at the time when, or a year later, my wife and I were in Egypt on a vacation just for a week. And we talked to the people there who went with us to the big sites to have there, the ancient ruins and so forth. And we talked to them, and they said they actually had to pay money. There was like an auction going on, who gets the shot first. So I don't know if you have to push people to do that. It's evil to do that, of course, but the psychological pressure was so high that they got a huge proportion of people already.
It didn't seem accidental to me that you had this COVID shot campaign, and then within a year, they opened the borders and changed the population of the country, and in a way that most countries would never accept what's happening in the United States right now.
Yeah, there are many things going on at the moment. You see, if you look at what I'm describing here, it's all about the autobiographical memory center. And the autobiographical memory center records what we think, what we experience, what we discuss with our friends. Everything is recorded, but it cannot record everything. So it's kind of a misterm here. It records everything what it can record. And it has a threshold. And the threshold is it has to come with emotion. So you can only learn new things if they are kind of emotional to you. So,
yes.
So stereotypical behavior, you don't remember that you did something you do every day.
Exactly.
So we know all that. So it has to come with an emotion. So if you really want to transform a brain, so first it's a two-step process. First, you block the neurogenesis, the production of new nerve cells in the hippocampus. Then you come up with the stories you want to install. But since they have to come with an emotion, you can't come with the same story every day. You have to change the story day by day. You have to come up with new stories with the same intent. Something is breaking down, the world is shut down, everything is dangerous, I'm losing my job because immigration. My family might be killed because we have an atomic war based on these local wars. We have the war against climate change. Everybody will drown because the water will rise. all these stories come up day by day. Actually, the World Economic Forum has a program, a brochure they bring out every January, and they talk about permacrisis, and they have hundreds of points. They are actually listed in my book. What they have in mind or in their background where we can start the next crisis. We need to change the story so that at the end of the day, your personal history is overwritten by these fear-mongering stories, and you have to change it, otherwise it doesn't work. So that explains it. It explains something very interesting, actually, by the way. I couldn't understand because, as I show in the book, it was all well planned. I mean, there were plans already out there, 2018, the program 201, we know that, everything was planned. But when it really actually happened in 2020, our government in Germany, for example, had new rules every day, changing rules all the time. And I said, they're behaving like they didn't know what they do, but everything was so well planned. I mean, the vaccine was out so quickly. Everything was planned, but they did as if they had no idea what they should do. But in reality, if you look from the point of view of the hippocampus of your autobiographical memory, this changing of rules is part of the plan. It has to be part of the plan, because changing the rules mean you have to memorize every day new rules, and they override your memory center. And that's
so you, after a while, can't remember what life was like before the rules.
Exactly. You see, if you want to install, and this is all about installing a new operating system. Yeah, in your introduction you said you didn't say it, but it's like an artificial intelligence controlled society by a social scoring system, and I call it in my book, let's say, an evil social operating system, which you can actually abbreviate by SOS. Yeah, quite nicely. It means something else, but we know where it ends, and so. If that's the plan, and you alluded to it, and I'm pretty sure everybody who reads Schwab's book knows what's going on and what they are intending, then it's clear you have to create a situation where there's no other fence anymore. There's no fence where you can see the grass is green on the other side. Look at other dictatorships, fascism in Germany, Stalinism, whatever.
Yes.
There was always a fence, a border where it was different on the other side. But we have to think here global. If everybody is attacked, then there is no border, there is no other side, there is no way, no place you can hide, no place you can go. But there's another border in your brain, the brain of history. You know it was different in the past. But once you start overriding the past, then even this border is gone. There is no way there's no refuge anymore. Nothing you can go back to and think about, okay, it was different in the former times. We have to get back to that place, to this time. We have to change something.
Yes.
And the ability to change something comes with individuality. Creativity, individuality are closely linked. But what's happening here is we destroy individuality. That means we destroy the creative power of humanity. And then we just follow the rules that the artificial intelligence.
So you're really describing a kind of mass Alzheimer's. I mean, with no, because a person without memory isn't fully a person.
Yeah, I give you another word for that. It's, you see, the ability to think, there was a Nobel Prize given for that actually in 2002 to Daniel Kahneman, a psychologist. The Nobel Prize was in economics. How do we come to decisions in difficult times, so to speak? That's what the Nobel Prize, of course, it was for businesses. But nevertheless, he described a mental energy that we need to activate thinking. And in my book, I describe what this mental energy is. It comes from the production of these new nerve cells. So if you shut down the ability to think, then you are stuck with the non-thinking brain, which he called System 1. So System 2 is the thinking brain. System 1 is our default action during the day, which doesn't require any energy. We call System 1. Another Nobel Prize winner who was trying to find out where our consciousness is, and our conscious is in the brain, Francis Crick, he got the Nobel Prize for discovering DNA. He published a paper in 2003 with Koch, his colleague, and he said System 2 is great that we have it. It's essentially the motor of our society, the thinking ability.
Yes.
But it's also good to have system one, which allows us in standard situations to actually react in a way that doesn't cost any mental energy. And he named the system one the zombie mode.
Zombie mode.
Zombie mode. So if you are not able to engage system two anymore, and that's what my book describes, under the attack of the virus and the fear mongering and a lifestyle that's not very healthy, then of course we are stuck in a zombie mode, and I really fear the zombie society very much.
A couple of questions. What does this do to religious faith, which was at the center of all societies until the Second World War? Does a zombie mode, does a zombie population have religious faith?
I'm not sure. If you are religious to begin with, you certainly will be the drive will be still religious belief. But again, religious belief is based on memory, and if memory is overwritten, well, I think I gave you already the answer.
Yes, you did. What can you do about it? To the people watching who had the mRNA shots, I think most of whom regret it.
Yeah, sure.
My sympathy goes out.
Yeah,
but what is this reversible?
It's reversible. Actually, this is what my paper, Unified Theory of Alzheimer's Disease, is all about, is that the power of the adult hippocampal neurogenesis lies in the fact that that the hippocampus, or our laboratory memory center, has the ability to produce new nerve cells every day and every night. And this production rate actually doesn't decline if we grow older. Actually, even 80 years old have a production rate which is similar to 18 years old. So that's why Alzheimer's is not natural. It's based on a lifestyle that doesn't allow an efficient production. And efficient production needs what everything that grows needs. Let's say micronutrients, in humans maybe physical activity, everything that was natural before we entered the modern world. So Alzheimer's was not a disease 100 years ago, it was unknown essentially. But the modern world changed our way so far away from our natural needs that that the production rate is actually low. And that was the reason in 2017 that depression rates were high. It's a very strong indicator. In 2019, for example, Alzheimer's was the number 3 deadly disease in Europe and in the Americas. So it's all about the hippocampus. So it was already damaged long ago, over the decades before 2020 was coming up, and there everything accelerated. Just to give you an example, in 2020 compared to 2019, depression rates, you remember, it was the highest 2017, 2019 worldwide, tripled in the United States, in 2020 due to the measurements, to the measures, to the mandates, to everything. Yes. Because everything that was done inhibited the production of new nerve cells. For example, closing of sports centers. If you do sport, let's say as a prehistoric person, you have to leave the cage, the cave, I mean.
Yes.
The cave. You leave the cave and you go outside, and you have to remember where might be danger, where is maybe a tree full of fruits, where you can find something to eat, whatever. So we have to remember. So every time we walk around, we activate a number of hormones. Growth hormone, erythropoietin, even our muscles produce hormones like irisin. And all these hormones have the function to make us physically more able to do the next hike outside,
Yeah.
So it's a training effect. But what I show in the book here is that every hormone is an activator of adult hippocampal neurogenesis. So if you start doing physical exercise, you actually enhance your mental abilities. And of course, if anything that has to grow, it must get everything it needs as a nutrient. So if you have deficiencies in certain nutrients that are required for the production of these nerve cells, it will be shut down. One such nutrient, for example, is vitamin D or omega-3 fatty acids. It was shown that a low level of vitamin D accelerates brain aging. Particularly, it accelerates the development of depression and Alzheimer's. So we have to raise the vitamin D level to a level that is natural. The natural level would be 125 nanomole per liter. It was shown, by the way, the same level of 125 nanomole per liter, peer-reviewed paper, meta-analysis, showed nobody would die of COVID if the level is 125 nanomole. So it's not only good for our mental immune system, it's also good for our physical immune system. And for me, it was totally clear it's not about health when I realized that there's a strong agenda against vitamin D supplementation. So it's not, it was like a sword with two cutting edges, where first of all, you cut down the physical immune system, making people prone to a disease, which would not be deathly under a high level of vitamin D. And that's proven. The causality is proven. So you have 125 nanomole, 0 death. But of course, if you want to install a new world order, which everybody accepts, even if you want to make people believe that the injection is the only way out of the mRNA, then you have to have some people who actually die.
So how do you get enough vitamin D?
Usually it's supplementation. It's not very difficult. And to get to a level that is ideal for brain health, ideal for immunological health, it's about 125 nanomole per liter. That's the level you should have. In Germany, for example, people in winter have like 25 nanomole. And the likelihood of deadly COVID, for example, is increased dramatically. So, for example, when the first studies came out, that was before the injection program enrolled. The jabs were, given to people. In fall of 2020, the German Cancer Research Center published a paper, 9 of 10 COVID deaths can be prevented just by raising the vitamin D level. But nobody was interested in that.
And you believe that there is an active effort to suppress vitamin D or to...
Absolutely. The very journal, the most prestigious clinical journal that we know of is the New England Journal of Medicine. That's why all the clinical trials on the mRNA were published there, and they accepted everything that was going this way. So it was very intriguing for me to realize that when I saw a paper in 2022 on bone health and vitamin D, which was, I don't know how much time we have, but this paper was bogus. It should not have been accepted because it was stupid. It was just a stupid paper, to be honest. People who had already had I do it very short. They had a vitamin D level already, which is totally in agreement with bone health. Then they were separated in two groups, randomly. One group got an additional vitamin D, the other group didn't get any. So you have two groups which were already have a vitamin D level which is sufficient for bone health. Then one group gets a little bit more vitamin D, and then the two groups were compared if they had more fractures over 5 years. Of course, there is no difference because bone health was already taken care of. But based on this study that was published in the New England Journal of Medicine, an editorial was published at the same paper, in the same journal, a decisive verdict on vitamin D. And the editors come to the conclusion that nobody, even with a deficiency, needs vitamin D. Doctors should stop prescribing vitamin D or even checking the vitamin D status. And people shouldn't waste money using...
Oh, come on.
Yeah, it was in New England Journal of Medicine. And in Germany, actually, it was Medscape, an article by a German professor. He actually said in a journal, in Medscape, and that's the most influential information journal for health practitioners worldwide, mainly financed by pharma industry. And this guy said it's actually a Nazi thinking to prescribe vitamin D or things like that, because that's where the idea of supplementing micronutrients actually was born, in his opinion. And so giving vitamin D, if you have to think about as a physician, if you give vitamin D, you're actually following Nazi ideology.
This is so dark.
It's extremely dark.
Where is it coming from?
Well, as I said, when I read Schwab's book from the World Economy Forum about COVID and the Great Reset, and the Great Reset, as you already alluded to in your introduction, is not something we would welcome if we were, mentally in a healthy state. We would actually, say, oh God, no. So it's clear they want to install that. It's the plan for 2030. And it's not only in his book, actually, when you go through government documents, which I show in the book as well, government documents in Germany, 2030, for example, they talk about a post-voting society, that artificial intelligence knows better than we know what is good for us, and that voting is not necessary anymore. So it's an abolishing of democracy. So that's one thing. And of course, people, actually, there was another document I found, official governmental document, that they say in 2030, people will hope that, based on climate change, the narrative here, that we actually will be controlled. We want to be controlled by artificial intelligence so that we can have a future for our children. But to be perfectly honest, this book is a counter-narrative, because a humane counter-narrative, because I strongly believe if we have enough mental diversity, enough individuality in our society, we will come up with ideas that will save us, from destruction, like pollution and other things. We'll come up with ideas, I'm pretty sure. But at the moment, we have a society based on the depression rates, on the Alzheimer's rates, from everything that we know of, all the parameters, that our society is not mentally healthy. And this is what my book is all about, to change the world into a society that has more mental health, that something what we call democracy is actually possible. I mean, democracy means the individual has the power to decide. But if our individuality, our mental immune system is destroyed, we either not decide because we are fearful, or we don't allow ourselves an opinion because we fear the consequences.
The average person who's made it this far, 45 minutes in, is terrified. Also recognizes that what you're saying is substantially true, because it comports with what we see all around us: the death of curiosity, of creativity, the hive mind, herd mentality, all happening all around us. But what are the steps, particularly for those who submitted to the mRNA jab, what are the steps you take to retain your psychological resilience?
The first thing I would propose very eagerly is, of course, read my book.
Yeah.
But they wouldn't be able to do that. Maybe they wouldn't be interested. I mean, curiosity is down, everything is down. But what people suffer from, many people suffer from, is what we call brain fog, consequences of the jab or of the infection, which we call also post-vac or long COVID. And what I show is that this neuroinflammatory insult on the brain, caused by the spike protein, leading to a cascade of events in the cell, in these immune cells which are in our brain. In this cascade, which leads to the production of these pro-inflammatory cytokines, is a molecule which we call GSK3 beta. I don't think I have to discuss it in more detail, but GSK3 beta is just a molecule, a signal transducer. And the natural inhibitor of the signal transducer is lithium. And it was shown that lithium at very low doses, not the doses you use for bipolar disorder or manic depression, doses which are 100-fold lower, 100-fold, like 1 milligram or so, maybe maximum 5 milligram, is sufficient to block, it's a natural inhibitor, to block this cascade, to get rid of the neuroinflammatory response. I already proposed this in a book which I call the Corona Syndrome. It's not published in English yet, but in 2021 I said, besides vitamin D, lithium would be able to block the cytokine storm. And at the end of 2022, just 2 years ago, 1.5 years ago, a paper was published. Patients had to go to the hospital, severe COVID, and they were on the brink of having to go to the intensive care unit because breathing problems. So they randomized these people into groups. They got standard treatment, but one group got lithium. After only a few days, the cytokine storm was completely shut down. The people were released from the hospital in half the time than the others, and not a single person died. So lithium is the key. Actually, I can prove that lithium is essential to humans. It's essential. By the way, that's another funny story. The World Health Organization claims, I found a paper from the World Health Organization where they show it's essential for goats, for rats, for rodents. I can show in papers it's essential for essentially every animal on Earth where it has been tested. But the World Health Organization argues it's not essential for humans. But I can tell you, if you would take lithium, you not only get rid of your brain fog, you also start, as was shown, to activate adult hippocampal neurogenesis. So in my paper of 2016, Unified Theory of Alzheimer's Disease, I show that lithium as a single molecule can actually stop the progression of Alzheimer's.
Given that you have, I think, seen and described in your book the big picture of what's actually going on, all these different threads are part of one thing. Has it changed your view about people or changed your view of the spiritual world? I mean, this is so evil that, and you said it's not about money exclusively, and it's not about elections. It's much bigger. I mean, how has that changed you?
Well, in the last chapter, which is the chapter of hope, where I show we can change that, we can empower ourselves again. Because you have to understand, we talk a lot everywhere about how it happened, what happened, how it was instrumentalized, all the different steps, all the evil things, but we need to know why it happened. And when we know why, then we know the target, and we know the target, in this case, the hippocampus, we know how to change things. But so the last chapter is about that. But in the last chapter, I also discuss with myself why it actually happened in the first place. What are these people? And I found a couple of books about and papers, publications, peer-reviewed, that if you are empowered, the more power you have, something develops which we call acquired sociopathy. And maybe that's behind that people have kind of a godlike, self-esteem,
yes,
and really believe that they do the right thing in their worldview, and they might think that we have to eradicate the humankind to save humankind, whatever. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what these people think. It's more important what the reader is thinking, what we all are thinking, because we are the majority. And at the moment, about 20%, I guess, or maybe even 25 to 30% of the people worldwide realized, 20% realized it very early, 25 to 30% realized it meanwhile, in total, I guess, what's going on. And what I argue is if each one of them makes it possible to convince somebody else about what's going on, then we are 50 to 60%. We are a majority again. And as I alluded to already, the people who are not really clear what's going on and don't want to know what's going on, they still follow the mass. And if the mass is 50 to 60% people who can think, if we can convince them that there's another majority somewhere else, a majority of people who want a humane future for our children, then we all will prevail. I'm 100% sure.
Last question. You live in a country, product of a society that's, I think, impressive, but is conformist.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
So how are you treated in Germany?
Well, if the mainstream is ignoring me, of course, Wikipedia starts to write interesting stuff about me.
Oh, that's the CIA's
I feel
information outlet.
Yeah. For example, my Wikipedia account up to a year from back a year was kind of pristine. It was only my science career in there and stuff I did. And now it's not pristine anymore, but I told my wife, it's an honor now. I mean, it's like I'm recognized, particularly my ideas are recognized, and that's the most important part, So, but besides that, not much happened. I don't want to, ask for it now, of course, but so far, we have a very strong community of people like you, who spread the word, who do extremely important work. I mean, I have to thank you for that. The work you're doing and many people in Europe doing, worldwide are doing, helping to spread the news, spreading the information. I think it's the most important thing at the moment that I can think of. And I have good contact, meanwhile, to all of them. That's really good.
It is important, the most important. Dr. Michael Nehls, The Indoctrinated Brain, in case you want to get that right away. Thank you.
I thank you.
I appreciate it. And welcome to Tucker Carlson. I hope you had a great Thanksgiving. Here's something that we didn't know but now do. In the winter of 2020, Tony Fauci wanted to know how the Chinese Communist Party was responding to COVID. They had COVID, we had COVID, and he wanted to see what they were doing. So he sent one of his deputies, a man called Clifford Lane, to China to find out. And Lane seemed stunned by what he saw there. Entire Chinese cities had been quarantined, the whole city. Huge numbers of people were forcibly locked inside their own homes, in some cases to starve to death. Secret police cruised the streets, forcing pedestrians into windowless vans for the crime of being outside. Household pets, dogs and cats, were declared unclean and beaten to death on the sidewalk. It was a hellish dystopian scene. So Lane returned to the U.S. to tell Tony Fauci what he'd seen there. But Tony Fauci was not disgusted. He was not appalled by the human rights abuses that Clifford Lane had seen in China. According to a new report in the Epoch Times, based on depositions that emerged this month, Tony Fauci was envious. This is what we have to do in the U.S., Fauci told Lane. So it's very obvious now that from day one, China was the model that American officials, public health officials, were using to respond to COVID here. And in fact, it still is the model. And in fact, lockdowns are still happening in China. They never really ended. And our public health officials have never stopped applauding those lockdowns. In April of this year, the Chinese government shut down Shanghai. Shanghai is the largest city in China. It's one of the biggest cities in the world. Shanghai has a population 3 times that of New York City, 25 million people. And all of those people, all 25 million, are now suffering indefinite lockdown. Shanghai is the largest prison camp in human history. So why is the Chinese government doing this to its biggest city? Well, no honest person believes it has anything to do with public health, because it doesn't, provably. As of Sunday, yesterday, there were no COVID deaths reported in China, a nation of nearly 1.5 billion people, not one COVID death. So COVID is not a threat to the Chinese government. Political unrest, however, is a threat to the Chinese government, always has been, and that's the point. In China, as in the United States, COVID policy is not a public health matter. COVID policy is a tool of social control. COVID policy is a way for the people in charge to strip from their population the most basic civil liberties and remain in charge. That's very clear, and that's exactly why our leaders support what's happening in China tonight, because they'd like to see it happen here too. Hundreds of millions of people imprisoned across the country. That, according to Harvard epidemiologist Eric Feigelding, is, quote, in everyone's interest. Really? Well, here's what it looks like in China.
In Lanzhou City, some were forced to quarantine outside in the cold, in parking lots. This viral video, which CNN could not verify, shows others forced to stay in male bathrooms, sleeping under urinals. And this one, the video says it's a quarantine site for kids in Henan province. A little boy jumping on bricks to avoid the pool of dirty liquid. This is where they use the bathroom. This woman sobs on the ground, crying that after she was caught with her mask pulled down, the government suspended her business for 30 days, losing a month's income. Metal spikes, which the man filming says were installed on a compound gate to prevent residents from leaving.
So those are ad hoc COVID concentration camps, but there are new purpose-built COVID concentration camps under construction right now all throughout China. The city of Urumqi in the west of China has effectively been its own concentration camp for the last 3 months. It's been completely locked down. Residents have been unable to leave their homes for any reason, including to get food or medicine. Last week, a huge fire broke out at an apartment complex in that city. The government had sealed most of the doors in the building, including the exits to the outside. It took firemen more than 3 hours to control the blaze, and by that time, 10 people had roasted to death inside, including a 3-year-old child. So news of this fire spread throughout the country. In China, as in the United States, social media are censored by the people in charge. They spend a lot of time and a lot of money there and here censoring it. But in the end, it doesn't always work. Outrage has a way of getting through even the tightest filters. So protests began to form across China. And those protests have since grown to become the biggest challenge to communist rule since the Tiananmen Square massacre more than 30 years ago. Here's what the protests look like. We'll see where this goes, but again, these are the biggest protests that we know about to occur in China since 1989. But what's interesting is the reaction in this country. So you watch those clips and you wonder, who could be rooting for the secret police in those clips? How could any decent person possibly be on the side of the Chinese government, against the population of the country, the people, against human rights, against human decency? Who could root for the tank against the lone brave man standing in front of it? And the answer is, unfortunately, some people could be on the side of the tank. Some people could support the oppressors against the oppressed. And in this country, many people do. One of them is Tony Fauci. Here he is from yesterday as people were being killed in China for seeking the most basic human freedoms. Here is Fauci suggesting once again that the Chinese government is the model for our country, and that's why we may need to close down our schools once more, even as COVID has become about as threatening as the annual flu. Watch.
Coming out of the holidays, should parents expect schools to shut down?
I don't know, Margaret. I'm not sure. When you talk about shutting down schools, there's always the collateral
That's also
effects.
radioactive.
It is, exactly. There's always the collateral issue. So you have to balance, and you do it in real time, depending upon the viral load of disease in your region.
Could we close the schools again? Fascism with a chirpy face. Sure, says Fauci, we could once again deny your children an education. We'll see. We'll see. We'll make that decision at a future time. Over at the Washington Post, star internet reporter Taylor Lorenz was not so circumspect. She just came out and said it. Lorenz flatly praised what China is doing to its own people. Unlike the United States, she said, China isn't choosing to, quote, kill off millions of vulnerable people. In other words, deporting your population to concentration camps is compassion. So you have to ask, since China is the biggest country in the world, our main rival, largest economy, what does the Biden administration think of this? We must have a position on it. We have a State Department that exists to think up positions on things like this. So what does the Biden administration think of what's happening in China? Well, apparently they agree with it. Today, a White House spokesman, John Kirby, the famous John Kirby, was asked for official reaction to the human rights protests raging today in China. And here's what he said.
What is the president's reaction when he hears protesters in China chant freedom or Xi Jinping step down?
The president's not going to speak for protesters around the world. They're speaking for themselves.
And so there's no reaction?
These protesters are speaking for themselves. What we are doing is making it clear that we support the right of peaceful protest.
The protesters are speaking for themselves. Haven't we spent $60 billion to prop up the corrupt government of Ukraine because they're on the side of freedom and democracy, even though it's not a free or democratic country? But that's the pretext. We're for freedom. But here you have people saying, hey, I don't want to be thrown in a concentration camp or starved to death in my own apartment. And the Biden administration can't even take their side? Really? They speak for themselves? They don't speak for the U.S. government? The U.S. government doesn't stand for basic human rights anymore? Really? John Kirby? You should be ashamed of yourself. It's hard to believe that's real. It is real. And the U.S. Congress has, by and large, adopted the same posture. Eric Swalwell spends a lot of his life yelping about human rights on Twitter. Abortion is human rights. And yet he said nothing about what's happening tonight in China. Now, we were not able to reach his former girlfriend, the Chinese spy Fang Fang, for comment either, unfortunately. Nor did we hear a word from the NBA commissioner. That would be Adam Silver. Now, Adam Silver also spends a lot of time yelping about what an authoritarian country this is and threatening the people who live here with punishment. He has no problem threatening American voters in North Carolina, for example, or in Texas who wanted separate bathrooms for little girls. What does he think of killing people for wanting to leave their apartment? Or throwing people en masse into concentration camps? Well, we decided to find out. So we emailed his office today to get his view of Chinese concentration camps. What does Adam Silver think of that? One of our premier moral voices. We didn't get a reply. Why is that? Maybe because he has made millions personally, and the NBA itself makes billions of dollars in China. So the NBA has no word to say about China throwing its population into concentration camps, turning Shanghai into a prison. And in fact, when you ask NBA coaches about civil rights abuses in China, what you get is a lecture about how we're worse. Watch.
It has not come up in terms of people asking me about it, people discussing it. No. Nor has our record of human rights abuses come up either. People in China didn't ask me about, people owning AR-15s and mowing each other down in a mall. I wasn't asked that question. The world is a complex place, and there's more gray than black and white.
Oh, so China commits genocide against Muslims and locks down a city of 25 million people, but we've got the Second Amendment and they're pretty much the same. That's the word from Steve Kerr, who's a very famous coach. These people are all on the take from China. The NBA is literally on the take from China, and therefore they will not say a single negative word about their masters. This is not an American league. These are not people who are loyal to the United States. They despise the United States. They're on the payroll of China. That's true. How is it not true? So they can't even criticize children burning alive in a high-rise apartment building because the doors have been nailed shut because of COVID, which doesn't actually pose a threat to anybody. So the NBA is taking a pass. Eric Swalwell and his Chinese spy girlfriend are taking a pass. The White House is taking a pass. State Department, MSNBC taking a pass. So you have to ask, like, what about the basic ideas behind this? One of the most basic ideas in American life is that it's my body, my choice. We have bodily autonomy in this country. Bodily autonomy. And bodily autonomy is central to the abortion debate. You can't force me to carry my child to term because it's my body. I control my body, not the government. In case you haven't heard that argument before, here it is. This is from recently. Watch.
The right to choose is on this ballot.
We want to protect a woman's right to choose.
Are you ready to stand up for a woman's right to choose?
Remove all doubt that a woman has a right to choose.
Protecting a woman's right to choose?
I mean this sincerely about what's on the ballot this year. Your right to choose is on the ballot.
Oh, the right to choose abortion. What about the right to go outside? Or the right to choose whether to send your children to school? Or the right to choose what drugs go into your body? Or the right to choose not to be thrown into a concentration camp? Are those viable rights too? Are those also examples of bodily autonomy? Do the 1.5 billion people who live in China or the 340 million who live here, do they have bodily autonomy? No. They don't, according to those people. They don't care about bodily autonomy. They don't care about human rights. What they care about is controlling you forever. And that's true. Laura Ingraham is the host of the Ingraham Angle. She joins us tonight. Laura, thanks so much for coming on. It's a little weird to get these lectures every day about how we have to drain the U.S. Treasury and send it to some thug in a tracksuit in Ukraine because human rights. But China is throwing people into concentration camps and no one will say one word, including John Kirby, who should be ashamed of himself?
Yeah, all the people that you mentioned, Steve Kerr, of course, LeBron James, Silver, Larry Fink from BlackRock, heads of Goldman Sachs, the Nike CEO, the U.S. media, a lot of libertarians, sadly, in the Republican Party. They're all complicit here. Let's be very clear what's going on. China is a slave state. There is no gray area. They are an evil dictatorship, and they seek world domination. Okay? They hate the blue states, the red states, and everything in between in the United States. The only people that are making billions of dollars in China care about is their own power, their own access, and their own bottom line. They'll sell out their mother for a buck. They'll sell out their mother for power, and apparently they'll sell out their national interest. So there are a lot of people who are collaborators and complicit here, Tucker, and yet they want to hold up Russia as the biggest threat in the world. I'm not saying it's not a threat, it is a threat. But comparing China with the largest standing army in the world to Russia, whose economy I believe is about the size of France's, is ridiculous.
Well, it certainly
and China, as we know, is funding the war in Ukraine right now. So I mean, I'm so glad you're doing this tonight because this is the single biggest threat to freedom and our own sovereignty and independence in the world right now. It is in China and our southern border.
So I'd be happy to live in a country that sort of let other countries do their thing and they've got weird customs in Afghanistan or Brunei or Saudi or even China, whatever. And like they do their thing, we do ours. I would be happy with that. What I'm bothered by is the same people who are defending mass concentration camps in China are attacking America. These supposed Adam Silver, Eric Swalwell, Joe Biden. It's all about attacking America as immoral. Why can't they just support their own country? If they're not going to criticize China, why not support us?
Well, the Bidens have made millions and millions of dollars in China, number one. But number two, these people loathe the American tradition. They believe we're an evil, awful, racist nation with sins that can never be redeemed and can never be real. Reparations are never going to be enough. So we can never do enough to atone for our sins, in their view. And to your point about Kirby and what he would not say today, remember what Joe Biden said on June 2nd, 2020, after the Floyd protests really exploded. He said they were very legitimate grievances and they should be a wake-up call for America. That's what he said when our nations, in many cases, were erupting in violence and in flames. Yet they're mute on a slave state in China? And they're the civil rights crusaders? Excuse me, they're all frauds.
John Kirby is supposed to be an adult. He comes on Fox News. He should resign his job tonight. He should be ashamed of himself that he is a mouthpiece for this grotesque policy. And I hope that he has enough dignity and self-respect to resign.
We also need Republicans, Tucker, who are finally speaking the truth about this issue and are not beholden to the investment banks and the multilateral corporations that are continuing to fund this military regime and dictatorship in China. We see what they're doing, and it is horrific.
I agree with that completely. Laura Ingraham, great to see you tonight. Thank you.
Good to see you, Tucker. Thanks.
So John Ratcliffe knows more than almost any living American about what's actually happening in China. He was the director of national intelligence under the last administration, and he has long warned. He has been one of the few voices in Washington to point out that China is the threat, the preeminent threat. John Ratcliffe joins us tonight with his reaction to what is happening in that country tonight. Mr. Ratcliffe, thank you so much for coming on. So
hey, Tucker,
it's hard to have perspective on this for most people, including me, when you see these videos. How significant, how serious are these protests potentially, do you think?
Well, we've never seen protests like this in over 30 years in China, and it really will force the Chinese government to change their governance model. Ever since Tiananmen Square, Tucker, what the Chinese Communist Party has done, they said, we're not going to let that happen again. We're going to engage in the largest massive surveillance state in the history of the world against our own citizens. And if we get even a whiff of discontent, we're going to stamp it out. And they've been successful in doing that. This is the first time in 33 years that we've now seen nationwide protests. And it's not just the problem or the challenge for Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party is it's moved from just a one-issue COVID issue to now a call for his removal and for regime change. So I don't think anyone knows exactly how this will play out, but it's very serious. And very clearly the Chinese Communist Party is going to have to adopt a different governance model going forward in light of what's happening there.
I don't think a day has passed in the last 2 years where the rest of us haven't gotten a lecture about, quote, democracy from the Biden administration. Given their commitment to democracy, how can they not have a position on this?
Well, the president's statement today was, let's just be nice. It was late, slow, weak, and cowardly. That's about the kindest thing you can say. I mean, this is the same president who had an opportunity to confront the Chinese president after 3 years, and a million Americans were killed by a virus that originated in China, and he didn't do it. So as disheartening as it is, it's not surprising. And, you know, I thought you and Laura really outlined, you know, what's happened here. The silence from the left is deafening. You know, as DNI, I saw this type of, you know, intelligence on a daily basis about how brutal the Chinese Communist Party could be. But on the left, what we've seen is, you know, some are silent because of greed. That's your Hollywood crowd, your Wall Street crowd, your NBA, groups and organizations that want access to 1.4 billion Chinese, and no matter what they do, it's not going to be enough to turn them away from that. But the other, as Laura said, are the group that's complicit. That's your Washington politicians, your blue state governors, your Dr. Anthony Fauci's, your teachers union president Randy Weingarten. These are the people who can't condemn the Chinese Communist Party because to do so would be to condemn themselves. They are the group that has praised and protected and defended and in some cases emulated the same lockdown measures that the Chinese Communist Party is engaged in right now. And to condemn the Chinese Communist Party would be to condemn themselves and to admit the American people that they've been lying for 3 years and that they were wrong. And I don't think we're going to see that.
Anyone who's awake at all can see exactly what's going on here. And I think they're playing with fire. You can't keep lying to this level forever, I would say. John Ratcliffe, great to see you tonight. Thank you so much.
You too. Thanks, Tucker.
So in one of the many intentional humiliations he's committed as president, where they degrade an institution so thoroughly that you can't help but have contempt for your own country, that's the whole point, Joe Biden hired a gender-fluid activist to oversee our country's nuclear waste, someone who's interested in something called pup play. Seems like kind of a weird guy. Well, it turns out he was just charged with a serious crime. We'll tell you what the crime is next. Plus, one mother is now paying big money to deprogram her family from a cult? No, from a college. You should consider doing this, actually. The successfully deprogrammed daughter of this wise mother joins us next. So sometimes when there's a crime, you ask yourself, were there signs? Could we have predicted this? When Joe Biden appointed a pup play-loving, non-binary dude to oversee our country's nuclear waste, could something possibly go wrong? I mean, we weren't sure, but that person, it turns out, was just charged for a bizarre crime. Trace Gallagher of the Fox News Channel, as always, has that story for us. Hey, Trace.
Hey, Tucker. Sam Britton is now on leave from the Department of Energy. Unknown if the leave is connected to Britton being accused of stealing a woman's clothing and luggage from Minneapolis-St. Paul Airport. Anthony Gakowski of Alpha News reports that Britton initially lied to police about the luggage, then agreed to return it, but apparently has not yet done so. Britton is the first openly gender-fluid person to hold a leadership post at the DOE, which the official title is Deputy Assistant Secretary of Spent Waste Disposition. That means disposing of spent nuclear fuel. Interesting that Britton's his drag queen alter ego is Sister Ray D.O. Active. Britton is also controversial for lecturing at colleges about Kink 101, talking about things like a pup play fetish, dressing up young men in dog collars and muzzles. Britton is also a member of a drag queen society that uses graphic sexual names to mock Catholic nuns. Britton, by the way, is seen here with Rachel Levine, the first transgender Associate Secretary of Health and Human Services. Britton is also proud of once visiting the White House in high heels. Tucker.
The great Trace Gallagher, new host of Fox News at night, midnight Eastern, a show that's killing it in the ratings for good reason. Trace, thank you so much. So a lot of parents have had this experience. You send your kid off to college, you're proud. Dylan got into Duke. We're so happy. And then the kid comes back and hates not only you, but the country and himself. And the chances of that child having a happy, productive personal life go to about zero. That's the fruit of liberal arts in this country now. So it's a very common experience, but one mother decided to try and fix it. She sent her daughter to attend Mount Holyoke University of Massachusetts, tuition over $50K a year. The child comes back totally programmed, like a cult member. So the mom spends $300 a day for a deprogrammer to undo the brainwashing, and it worked. Annabella Rockwell is the daughter. She graduated Mount Holyoke. She's now the development director at PragerU. She joins us. So, Annabella, thank you so much for coming on. So deprogram suggests undoing unreasonable religious belief. Did you feel like a cult member after Mount Holyoke?
Tucker, thank you so much for having me. First, I'm going to say that I arrived at Mount Holyoke bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, so excited to be there in 2011. And as soon as I got there, I was told that, I should refer to myself as a first year, not a freshman, because we were a historically women's college. I was left a note in my mailbox saying, he may be a she may be a he, don't assume anyone's gender. And I thought, oh, okay, that's new. And then the last thing was we had the moho chop, which was this ritualistic haircut that people did in the first semester where everyone would shave their head, sort of as an act of rebellion. So to answer your question, yes. I mean, as time went on and I studied history, I became completely brainwashed into believing that I was oppressed by our toxic patriarchal society. And I left school. I was sad, anxious, intellectually starving. And by 2015, when I graduated, I completely estranged myself from my family.
Yeah. Well, that is underneath it all. We joke about the lunacy on college campuses, but the real cost is not that they'll vote Democrat. The real cost is that they won't love their parents anymore. And that's the most upsetting part of it, I think. So how did you get better?
So in this panic of me not communicating with my mother, she consulted a cult specialist. This person gave her devastating statistics that most people don't make it out, but a glimmer of hope that it tends to be young women who do. So she spoke to him, and he made it very clear to her, do not affirm your daughter's newfound identity. You know her best. She is your child. Don't affirm her.
Yes.
So she was taught how to communicate with me. Now, to actually be deprogrammed, I had to humble myself. A couple things. I reconnected with my family. I moved home. I asked for forgiveness. I admitted I was wrong. Secondly, I made a lifestyle change. I stopped drinking. I started to believe in God again. And lastly, I had to unlearn my 4 years of wokeism by watching 5-minute PragerU videos online for free.
Amazing. It is a cult. Its aim is to separate you from the people who love you most. And I'm so impressed and have such respect for your mother for taking it as seriously as it deserves to be taken, and for you for getting out of it. Annabelle Rockwell of PragerU, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me.
So you remember vividly when social media, Twitter specifically, censored the Hunter Biden laptop story in order to get Joe Biden, who is senile and showered with his own daughter, elected president. How did that happen? Well, Elon Musk is about to tell us. He has the documents. He owns Twitter now. He can tell us how that censorship happened, who pushed for it, what were the mechanics of it. Well, Apple doesn't want that information to come out. Why? They're threatening to punish Twitter if he releases it. An amazing story. Straight ahead. As in China, social media in the United States are censored. That's not compatible with democracy. You can't have censorship in a democracy. A country that censors is not a democracy. Elon Musk, who's not from this country, knows that. He bought Twitter with the aim of stopping censorship and restoring free speech. He just said this: there's been a lot of censorship on Twitter, and we're going to find out what it is. Quote, the Twitter files on free speech suppression soon to be published on Twitter itself. The public deserves to know what really happened. End quote. So why shouldn't we know that? Why shouldn't we know who is shutting down free speech in a country that claims to be a democracy? Well, everybody in power is panicked over this. Apple is threatening to remove Twitter from its App Store. So if Twitter no longer can get its app on the App Store, there's no more Twitter because you access Twitter through the app. So they're essentially threatening to shut down Twitter. Meanwhile, the White House and the media are trying to convince you that the problem is not China throwing people in concentration camps, suppressing free speech. The problem is Elon Musk, who is trying to restore free speech. He's the evil one. Watch.
It's amazing to watch someone like Elon Musk, who is such a he's such a child. You know, he's so immature. He needs attention all the time. And these guys with these money and this attention and these daddy issues.
I'd say this libertarian nonsense is destructive to American national security. And he has got to reinstitute the same restrictions that were on Twitter before he bought it.
When it comes to social media platforms, it is their responsibility to make sure that when it comes to misinformation, when it comes to the hate that we're seeing, that they take action.
There's something very dangerous about him. He reminds me of a Bond villain. As I said, when the richest guy in the world buys a social media platform, it's just not a good equation. I think he's a dangerous fellow.
And that sort of speaks to how he's been governing over at Twitter. Not much transparency into what's going on, just really him ruling by tweet.
So you could deconstruct every single one of those statements. Here's the CIA officer, the guy who lied for a living, telling you we need more censorship. But they're not actually coming out against, quote, hate. What they're saying is, we decide what you can say and what you can't in this democracy. And if you try to speak freely, we'll crush you. It's exactly what they're saying. Jason Whitlock is the host of Fearless. He has been relentlessly focused on the question of social media when most people were ignoring it for years, and we are honored to have him join us tonight. Jason Whitlock, thank you for coming on. So Elon Musk has suddenly ascended to the place that Saddam Hussein used to occupy as the most dangerous man in the world. What is his crime exactly?
His crime is potentially ratting out the people that have been using Twitter and social media apps as mind control. And that is what they've been doing with Twitter. They've been controlling the narrative and what people are allowed to think. If you control what people are allowed to think long enough, you will eventually control what they actually believe. Our thoughts lead to our beliefs. They've been controlling our thoughts through social media with their algorithms that suppress certain thoughts and uplift other thoughts. They've been controlling it by smearing people. If you raise questions, hey, I don't think the police are just out randomly killing black people. Well, here comes that Twitter algorithm to smear you as a racist and one of the worst people on the planet. Shut up, don't say anything. Let's just go along with this narrative. Let's put in people's minds that the police are out randomly killing black men. Therefore, these riots and the burning and looting of cities is justified. Everything that they think or they accused Donald Trump of doing. He inspired, he justified the January 6th riots and all that. That's what they've been doing with Twitter. Justifying riots and looting and violence and chaos and anarchy and the destruction of America for a decade over Twitter. The only thing, my concern is like Elon Musk almost sounds too good to be true, that there would actually be someone with that kind of money who would actually care to stop these people. Hats off to the man so far. I'm thoroughly impressed.
I am too. If he goes through with this, though, it sets a very bad precedent for the people in charge. It's like someone could come in and break the rules. Someone could think freely and say what he really believes. Like, that could be contagious.
Well, and I'm going to really irritate people and give someone credit that deserves credit for being the first domino, and it's really Donald Trump inspired this. He took on the establishment, the fake news industry, and upset the establishment and their narrative and control and started calling it fake news. And now what they're afraid of is like Trump, through the force of his personality and opinions, shook up the establishment. It sounds like Elon Musk wants to come with the actual receipts and justify everything that Trump has said over the last 5 to 6 years, and they just don't want the receipts put on display for everyone to see.
No. People who fear facts are dangerous, I would say. Jason Whitlock, who again has been on this longer than anyone I know, thank you so much.
Thank you, Tucker.
So you just heard the White House spokesperson decry hate on the internet, hate campaigns. The single biggest hate campaign of our lifetime was waged by the Biden administration against the, quote, unvaccinated. People who are unvaccinated were unclean. You shouldn't have Thanksgiving with them. They're bad people. They're not really Americans. They could kill you. Well, now facts have overtaken that story. The majority of people dying from COVID at this point are vaccinated. So it's not a pandemic of the unvaccinated. No one has told JetBlue, though. JetBlue apparently still believes that the unvaccinated are dangerous, but here's the amazing thing. JetBlue is fine with a violent felon on its plane. No problem at all. An update on JetBlue next. So as we told you, and as you doubtless saw, Brazil had its presidential election several weeks ago, and the left won. And when the left wins, you can't contest the outcome because, of course, it's legitimate. But not everyone in Brazil is convinced of that. In fact, millions of people think the election was rigged, and they now have a criminal as president. So there are protests underway across the country. There are reports tonight from investigative journalist Matt Turman that the Brazilian military stands with the incumbent president, Jair Bolsonaro. Matt Turman joins us tonight. Matt, thanks so much for coming on. I know it's a complicated situation, but you follow this as closely as any English speaker. How would you summarize it?
Well, you're right. It is a complicated situation. We are in day 29 of mass protests in Brazil, a democratic country with free elections. And we're talking not tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands, but millions. And what looks to be, when all said and done, will be tens of millions. This is the largest democratic protest in possibly human history. And the global media is crickets on this. It is totally being memory holed in real time. But the people are very clear. They do not want to be led by a convicted criminal. And recall, Lula da Silva was convicted in 3 separate courts of 12 charges by 19 judges unanimously, not Bolsonaro appointees. This was years before Bolsonaro. And his judicial appointees in the Supreme Court had freed him in the last 2 years just so he could run in this race. And they annulled and vacated his multiple sentences, 12-year sentence, 580 days he served. They let him out to run. And Brazil has a law in the books that says no convicted felon can be an elected office. And they vacated that. They absolutely put him on the chessboard so that they could attempt to control the outcome. And now the people en masse are crying foul. Even in the districts where he supposedly has a stronghold, say the Amazon with indigenous peoples, they're marching on Brasilia. Every city in the country is filled with protesters. And now the question is, what is to be done when you have a judiciary that is not comprised of judges in the classical sense, impartial, nonpartisan judges, but political appointees and partisans who are working to skew an electoral outcome. And so the military has a special role in the Brazilian Constitution, Article 142, that says they are the ones to adjudicate separation of power disputes. And it looks like this will be coming to a head. Amazing. And of course, da Silva would be a willing servant of China. So from America's perspective, 100%. It's bad.
but the Biden administration is on his side, of course. Matt, thank you for your reporting tonight on that. Appreciate it. Sure. So the majority of people dying right now of COVID have been vaccinated against COVID. Obviously didn't work, the majority. So with that in mind, it's a little weird to learn that the airline JetBlue is still refusing to hire people who haven't taken the COVID vaccine, even though they're the minority of people who are dying of COVID. They say it's part of their commitment to safety. But as it turns out, that commitment to safety does have limits. So JetBlue just hired a violent felon called John Perry's as a pilot. This man spent 9 years in prison for breaking into the home of a judge. He's on probation until 2044. Is this a real story? Well, Luke Rosiak broke it. He's an investigative reporter with the Daily Wire, and he joins us to confirm. Luke, those are, I think, the bare bones of the story. It doesn't seem like that could be real, but it is.
Yeah, John Perry's committed a heinous crime. He broke into the home of a judge and brutally assaulted the judge's daughter in the shower with a metal baton. She fled the home bloodied and naked. When he was arrested, he was found wearing a bulletproof vest, and in his car he had knives, handcuffs, parachute cord, and most disturbingly, a shovel. So this is a bad dude. Now, JetBlue forced all 25,000 of its employees to get vaccinated last year, whether they liked it or not. They won't hire you if you haven't had the vax. But they did hire John Perry's. And interestingly enough, I thought you'd get a kick out of this, the crime he was convicted of was assault with a deadly weapon while wearing a mask.
So, look, most people believe in redemption and you want to see violent felons get better. But to be a commercial airline pilot, you'd think you'd have to meet a separate and a higher standard just because you have the lives of your passengers in your hands. Has JetBlue responded to your inquiries on this?
No, they wouldn't answer any of my questions. And it really is like, it's the epitome of woke logic here where, violent criminals are not a safety threat. They should be let out of jail. They should fly us in steel tubes full of gasoline. But what's a safety threat is not wanting to get a vaccine that doesn't reliably prevent you from getting or transmitting a disease that pretty much everyone has gotten now anyway.
Yeah, and it dramatically increases your risk of heart problems in flight. So yes, that is the epitome of woke logic, as you just so perfectly put it. Luke Rosiak, thank you for the story and confirming it. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. Hope you had a great Thanksgiving, a day away from politics and mass media with people you love and who love you back. It's really a spiritual spot treatment. That's the ideal. We ought to do it more than a couple times a year. But we are back, and now that we are an obvious observation, all prosperity in this country depends ultimately on energy. Our consumer economy runs on it. It takes energy to make things and bring them to your house. Our tech economy runs on energy too, a lot of it. How do you think they keep their server farms running? Energy is pretty much, in fact, the key to everything that Americans do for a living. It's the key to healthcare, and agriculture, and yes, media, and travel, and construction, entertainment. Even finance, which is symbiotic with the real economy, depends in the end on energy, because you can't lend money to businesses if they no longer exist, and if energy prices go up high enough, they don't exist. So given how central, very obviously central, energy is to everything that matters in America, it's hard to believe that the Biden administration would intentionally make energy much more expensive. Because we know for a fact, having seen it repeatedly through history, that high energy prices will crush our economy faster even than the COVID lockdowns did. People will become poor. Some of them will die. That's not a guess. It will happen. So given all that, it's unimaginable that anyone but our enemies would want to raise our energy prices to the point where our economy collapses. And yet that is exactly what the Biden administration has decided to do. And to do it, they're using twin instruments of climate policy and their war against Russia. The effect? In a nation with the largest recoverable oil reserves on planet Earth, many Americans can no longer afford fossil fuels. And once again, this is not an accident. It's not a natural cycle we're going through. Politicians and policymakers are doing it to us on purpose. Now that the midterm elections are over, the media can finally begin to cover the inevitable results of these policies. CNN, for example, just ran an article about Americans who are worried about freezing to death over the winter in America. One 63-year-old woman in Philadelphia called Charmaine Johnson said that she is torn between heating her home and buying food. And of course, she's choosing food because she has no choice. It's miserable, she said. It's like living in an igloo. Another man, a 67-year-old man called Tim Wisely, said he turns on his heat only when his teeth begin to chatter. You can't go food shopping and get oil. It's one or the other, he said. It's a horrible feeling. It's a feeling I wouldn't wish on anyone. And it's a feeling that Americans have not had in generations. These are American citizens living in a major American city that used to be considered first world, and they can't afford heat. And it's happening not just in Philadelphia, but everywhere. Average home heating prices went up 17% last year, and they're up another 18% this year. Again, not organic. This is the result of policies from the Biden administration and its allies. Not just in the Congress, but in think tanks across Washington and in the entire American news media. This did not happen by accident. As Fox Business has reported, once winter arrived, the problem is going to get much worse.
We're riding around with oil for less, and they say that their customers are struggling to keep up with these skyrocketing costs. Across the board, heating costs are expected to be high this winter. Heating oil in particular, up 68% year over year. Today, they filled up this tank with about $950 worth of home heating oil. A year ago, the same amount of oil would have cost them closer to $600. That's why the company tells me that some customers are just doing without.
People have gone without hot water and heat for a week just because they haven't had the money to call me and say, hey, come on in.
They don't have the money for hot water or heat? Again, what country is this? Any country that can't provide hot water or heat in the winter isn't much of a country. And again, it doesn't need to be this way because we have the largest recoverable oil reserves on the planet. What happens when energy costs continue to rise? Well, people run out of money, and it doesn't take long. According to data from the Bureau of Economic Analysis, households are spending their cash reserves far faster than anyone, all those economists projected, even as credit card debt reaches historic levels. If you're borrowing money for household expenses on your credit card at exorbitant rates, you're done. As Business Insider reported, quote, Americans have already burned through a third of their pent-up savings. That's nearly 3 times more than previously thought, and signals spending will soon slow down. Yeah, that's what happens when people run out of money. They stop spending it because they don't have it, and then the consumer economy slows. So when energy costs rise, again, just to be clear, because it's not sophisticated economics here, when they rise, so does the price of everything else. And the first staple to rise in cost is the one that you have to have, and that's food. Watch. So why is this happening? Well, you heard the reporter allude to it, but not really explain it. There are, of course, many factors, but there are 2 big factors that are driving this, driving inflation and the rising cost of everything around you. And they are, in order, global warming policy and the war in Ukraine. Now, as it always does, the left used people's best instincts, compassion, and care for the planet to subvert them into supporting these 2 lunatic policies. If you care about people, you support the war in Ukraine. If you care about the planet, you support global warming policy. But of course, neither one of these was about what they said it was about. Both of them were designed to spike energy costs, to increase the control of the people currently in charge and to enrich their donors. So if you wanted to fix this, the very first thing you would do, if you wanted to help the American middle class, would be to force a ceasefire in Ukraine. That would help the world, and it would help our middle class. Then you would encourage more domestic energy production because we have the domestic energy. Then you would take a look at the trillions we have spent on renewable energy, solar panels, electric cars, wind power. This has made a small group of people incredibly rich, but it has put our grid in peril, and it has raised the cost of energy beyond the reach of middle-class Americans. But the Biden administration is not looking for solutions, just the opposite. They're looking for ways to squeeze a few more dollars out of an increasingly impoverished American middle class. According to Bloomberg this week, and we're quoting, the IRS says more auditors and upgraded technology could help raise as much as $1 trillion. Oh. So you have less money and they plan to take more. If that's not an act of hostility, what is? It is an act of hostility. They don't like you and they're not hiding it. But big picture, every other major company in America is laying people off, but the IRS somehow, thanks to Joe Manchin, the moderate from West Virginia, the IRS somehow has the dough to hire 87,000 new employees, and they're coming for you. They didn't hire those people by accident. They hired them to take more of your money. So businesses who have to forecast for a living have seen this coming, and they're preparing to cut workers. And so what this looks like, if you take 3 steps back, is an economic death spiral. Ahead of Christmas shopping season, when Amazon usually adds employees, Amazon is now laying off employees, a lot of them. 10,000 people laid off from Amazon. And the founder of Amazon, Jeff Bezos, is actually encouraging people, his customers, not to buy his products. Watch this.
The economy does not look great right now. Things are slowing down. You're seeing layoffs in many, many sectors of the economy. People are slowing down. The probabilities say if we're not in a recession right now, we're likely to be in one very soon. If you're an individual and you're thinking about buying a new, large screen TV, maybe slow that down, keep that cash, see what happens. Same thing with a refrigerator or a new car or whatever. Just take some risk off the table. If you're a small business, maybe delay some capital purchases. Do you really need that new piece of equipment? Maybe it can wait a little bit. Have some cash on hand. Just a little bit of risk reduction could make the difference for that small business if we do get into even more serious economic problems. So you got to play the probabilities a little bit.
Wait, so the guy who sells big screen TVs on the internet is telling his customers, the source of his personal wealth, not to buy big screen TVs off the internet? Really? That's how worried he is. That he actually, for maybe the first time ever, is caring about you. Well, that's quite amazing. And he's not the only one. Bezos is not the only one who's worried that something bad is about to happen to our economy, the global economy. In October, the IMF warned that 2023 will bring a recession for most of the world. That same month, the CEO of JP Morgan, the country's biggest bank, Jamie Dimon, said a recession is almost certain in the coming months. So what do you do to avert a disaster? Well, you probably can't stop it. You should know what its outlines will look at. Take a look at the housing market if you want to know. Home sales are at their lowest level in a decade. As the Fed raises interest rates to fight inflation, mortgages become too expensive. But if the Fed were to cut interest rates, home prices would go up along with inflation. You see the problem here. We've reached the end of monetary policy's ability to tweak our economy. So faced with all of this, the one thing you'd hope is to have an administration that understands what the problem is and might at least be interested in fixing it and taking care of the middle class, people who don't have a margin, people who are on the bottom. They're always the subject of our concern. What do you do about the homeless? What do you do about people who make $80,000 in the New York suburbs? Nobody cares about them. Here's Joe Biden explaining with a straight face that actually everything's fine. His economic plan is working. So that's pathetic, and everyone knows it's pathetic, and maybe the only upside of the Biden administration is that there's really no lying at this point. This isn't working. They just did better than expected in the midterms, the Democratic Party, unfortunately. But we're now facing the next election in 2024, and no sane person wants Joe Biden to run because everybody gets that this is unsustainable. Even the media gets that at this point. So the question is, who replaces Joe Biden, and what can that person do about the disaster that his administration has created? Looking ahead tonight, we are honored to welcome Victor Davis Hanson, a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution and one of the smartest people we know. Professor, thanks so much for joining us. So I think it's pretty clear where we are, how we got here. What next?
Well, unfortunately, Tucker, we had a midterm referendum on the Biden administration, and they not only didn't articulate what they were doing, they didn't defend it, and worse yet, they didn't promise to change. And so they look at the referendum, the midterms, and they think, you know what? Inflation, oil prices, we didn't even talk about it. Instead, we called our enemies semi-fascist. We said they were un-American. We said women were dying all over the country when they can't get abortions. And that was a successful formula. So we're going to do what we did before. We're going to double down on it. We would rather be ideologically correct than worry about the American people, the middle class. This is exactly what he promised on the campaign trail in 2020. He said he was going to eliminate fossil fuel. He just picked up the mantra from Barack Obama, who said he was going to make electricity prices skyrocket when he shut down coal. And Stephen Chu, the designate energy secretary in 2008, said he wanted European high prices. I think we got to get acculturated of the fact that this, as you said, was deliberate. It's going to continue, and they see it as a great good. They're never subject to the consequences of their own ideology, and they feel we stupid middle-class people don't know what's good for us. They do, and we've got to go down this green road into oblivion. And every once in a while, when they get close to an election, they can tap the Strategic Petroleum reserve, or they can get a $500 billion student loan amnesty. And then after the midterms are over, we'll hear about all the layoffs or the Bitcoin collapse of Mr. Bankman-Fried, and then they can continue putting a little Band-Aid on the wound until the next election. But they're not going to change, unfortunately.
No, they're not going to change. And I think that's the key insight right there. They're not going to change. They're not. And voters didn't force them to this cycle, unfortunately.
Well, everything you've articulated, Tucker, is absolutely true, but they wouldn't disagree with you. They would say, yes, this is the cost of transitioning to a green future, and there's going to be some damage. It's not going to be us that are hurt, but they're not ashamed. They're not apologetic.
Yeah. Until they ban private air travel, I'm not listening to a word they say, and I mean that. Victor Davis Hanson, great to see you tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, as we just told you, a lot of people in this country, hard to believe, but it's real, will not be able to afford to heat their homes this winter. The CEO of a New England energy company has wrote a letter to Biden saying the power grid might not make it through either. Eversource CEO Joseph Nolan told Biden, quote, "I am deeply concerned about the potentially severe impact a winter energy shortfall would have on the people and businesses of this region." Mike Taylor owns Combined Energy Services. He joins us tonight to assess what this winter will look like with this energy crisis. Mike, thanks so much for coming on. I know we've talked about this before. How are you feeling about this winter? We're at the end of November. What does it look like for the next 4 months?
Well, Tucker, I've been speaking with some of my suppliers, and also Opus provides a lot of information in the industry. They're claiming that inventories are at 65% of the 5-year average. Good news is a refinery in Nova Scotia just reopened. Irving Oil supplies much of New England, and Paulsboro, New Jersey is back up supplying the New York Harbor. So I think we're at a fine line, as I said before, with heating oil and diesel in the Northeast. But my suppliers are saying as long as we keep this La Nina warm weather pattern, I think we're going to have enough heating oil for this coming winter. I think the bigger problem, as you said, is the Biden administration, their war against fossil fuels. We're missing 5 refineries in the United States. That's over 1 million barrels a day. They shut down when COVID hit, and they have no plans of reopening, as well as apparently we have control over one in St. Croix that they can't meet clean air emissions. We've shut down a refinery in another country. So the administration's war on fossil fuels, Tucker, is just mind-blowing.
So there's such a demand for fossil fuels, for diesel, kerosene, heating oil, jet fuel, gasoline, of course. How could 5 and 6, including St. Croix, refineries be closed? I don't understand that.
Well, I'm assuming it's a demonization of fossil fuels and these institutions no longer allowing reinvestment in them. But I look back at the agenda to put us on electric. So, Tucker, I was at a panel discussion in Albany, New York of the Empire Center this past spring. National Grid had a presenter there, a large electric and natural gas utility in the Northeast. Their representative said on the coldest day in winter, they put out 4 to 5 times as much energy with natural gas than electric does on its hottest day in summer. So somehow up here in the Northeast, New York, we're going to eliminate all the natural gas, heating oil, propane, and we expect the grid to pick this up. I just can't imagine how this is going to work. And they've also said electric rates are up 65% this season. Where do we think this is going to take us?
Well, it's insane. And natural gas is far cleaner than renewables. It's far cleaner all in than solar or wind. I mean, it's lunacy. And I appreciate you pointing that out every time. Mike Taylor, thank you.
You got it. Thanks for having me, Tucker.
So the cryptocurrency exchange FTX blew up in spectacular fashion. It looks like fraud. But in the wake of that, rather than thinking through, like, why did regulators let this happen, there's a new effort underway to regulate every single financial transaction that occurs in this country through something called the Central Bank Digital Currency, CBDC. If that happens, we're done. They can control you with a flick of a switch. So you should know what they're planning and how we might be able to stop it. That's all straight ahead. The cryptocurrency exchange FTX blew up a couple weeks ago. It looks like one of the biggest, maybe the single biggest financial scam in history. And you have to wonder, how was this allowed? So the head of the company was all over the media, and in a number of interviews, he was wearing shorts and playing video games. Why did nobody notice? And where were the regulators? Where was Gary Gensler? Well, they were apparently giving this guy a pass because they knew him or they agreed with his politics. So they're not being punished for what they allowed to happen. Thousands of people defrauded out of their life savings. Instead, they're using the collapse of FTX to their own advantage to push for something called central bank digital currency, CBDC. Now, what is central bank digital currency? Well, that's where all financial transactions are effectively controlled by the central bank, really by the government. And as we saw in Canada last winter, if they don't like what you're doing, they can zero out your savings with a keystroke. So you have no autonomy whatsoever. You are completely under the control of the people in charge, who, by the way, may hate you. So this appears to be coming in this country. Several banks have announced already that they're working with the Fed to implement a CBDC. Once again, if this happens, we're done. No more political debate. We will have unprecedented levels of regulation, of surveillance, and of control. So effectively, Chinese social credit scores come to America. Russell Brand recently explained all of this in a clip of the new Prime Minister of the UK, Rishi Sunak, boosting a CBDC for England. Watch this.
Is a keen advocate of CBDCs, central bank digital currencies. Here he is, in fact, advocating for them.
Today, I'm proud to say that under the UK's presidency, the group of the world's 7 most advanced economies, the G7, is launching a set of public policy principles for retail central bank digital currencies, CBDCs. Central bank digital currencies could be a digital version of money, a bit like a digital banknote.
I like it, because we've got a broad concept. What if this person's an idiot? Which we think that they are. It's like a digital penny for your digital money box, for your digital hole that you live in. You will owe nothing. You will be happy.
That could be used alongside physical notes and coins.
For now, till we phase them out, if you start any little trucker protests, oh, where's my money gone? The digital piggy bank is broken, I'm afraid. Start being a bit more cooperative.
Unlike most of the digital money people use daily today, it would be issued directly by a central bank, like the Bank of England in the UK.
That's good, a central bank. Nothing wrong with centralised authority, centralised power, globalist decrees coming down from on high, avoiding democracy. That's exactly what we want. Keep talking.
And governments and central banks across the world are working together.
Oh, really? They're working together? Well, that's just such great news. The IMF, the World Bank. Why don't we involve the WEF and the WHO? What we need are unelected global bodies that have been able to co-opt political power, respond to financial power, and ignore and oppress ordinary people. Whether it's the recent medical emergency or the cost of living crisis, we're seeing the benefits all around us. I can't wait for your next policy. You're going to take our money now. This is great.
Looking into what having a digital currency might mean in practice.
I think I know what it means in practice. More power for you, no power for us.
This includes issues that people care about, such as ensuring users' money would be safe and secure, that it could work with other ways to pay, would be energy efficient.
Oh, it's got to be energy efficient. I was about to say, is it energy efficient? Is it energy efficient? I've got to make sure. Oh, a few other questions. You wouldn't use this ever, would you, to implement control or to advance social credit type systems or to shut down the bank accounts of people you disagree with or to surveil people and have a surveillance network that you've developed in conjunction with big tech and now a financial arm that you're developing so that you can lockstep together and gridlock us in a digital prison of surveillance tyranny?
Answer to those questions? Oh, yeah. Vivek Ramaswamy is one of the smartest people we ever talked to, author of Nation of Victims, joins us tonight to assess. So, Vic, thanks for coming on. So here you have regulators in the United States failing in the most obvious possible way to rein in this cryptocurrency exchange. And then in the wake of that, they're not punished, but they've decided they're going to use it to get more power for themselves. Am I misreading what's happening here?
I think you're reading it correctly. As the expression goes, never let a good crisis go to waste. Now, I think these CBDCs here in the U.S. are a really bad idea, Tucker, for a few reasons, but it's worth knowing the reason that economists supposedly support it, right? So the main argument is they say that actually China is doing it, and the U.S. will be less competitive, and that the dollar would be less strong if the U.S. fails to keep up. There are so many things wrong with that argument, but the first and most obvious is that that's a good path to get us to be more like China, which is not a good way for the U.S. to go in terms of being a surveillance state. And actually, it's exactly for that reason that if you think about it, the U.S. could actually have a stronger dollar if it does not jump onto the CBDC bandwagon, because people might want to actually hold a currency that doesn't allow them to be the subject of surveillance and control. So you could make the argument equally in reverse about the supposed strong dollar that we're going to miss out on without the CBDCs. And this is, of course, against the backdrop that you know well, Tucker, which is the fetishization of the strong dollar as supposedly a good end-all, be-all anyway.
That's
It
right.
actually hurts American manufacturers, and there's a very good reason why China has artificially tried to depress its currency to have a weaker yuan. So on many levels, the argument fails.
This is not an investment show, but since you're very fluent in this language and knowledgeable, what will this do to gold prices? I mean, if they get close to this, a lot of people are just going to try to opt out of the system, correct?
I would think that it has a big effect, a positive effect on gold prices. Markets have been a little bit weird in the last year, where gold certainly hasn't gone up as you might have actually otherwise predicted it to in normal times. But against that backdrop, though, when you ultimately all forms of paper become meaningless and actually go into digital currencies that could be means of governments effectuating control, that might be the last stand for actually gold finally having the last laugh at the end of the day. But more importantly, Tucker, is we should not see this great reset, this dissolution of boundaries between the public and private sector, between different nations, ultimately create this new world order. And CBDCs, mark my words, are just the symptom of that deeper cancer.
Well, that is exactly right. So nicely put. Vic, it's great to see you tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So they've been telling you that the problem is you're keeping too much of your money. That's why we need 87,000 new IRS agents. Again, thank you, Joe Manchin. But at the same time, they are sending tens of billions of dollars to Ukraine's beggar king, the thug in the tracksuit, constantly demanding money. It's completely over the top. And so we decided to put together a video montage of some of Zelensky's most recent demands. Not requests, demands. That's next. ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance. In other words, it doesn't really mean anything, but it means everything. It's a business version of a Chinese social credit score. It's a way for the left to control companies and make certain that all the money, all the investments go to causes they believe in. Well, the effects of this, not surprisingly, have been a complete disaster. Countries with high ESG scores like Sri Lanka and Ghana are collapsing, but the Biden administration still sees those countries as a model for us. They've decided to transform our economy with ESG. This is what happens when all decisions are made through a political/ideological lens. That works great in sociology class. It doesn't work very well if you're running a country. But it's the reason the Biden administration is pushing so-called renewables and electric cars, which increase our reliance on China. China makes the solar power and panels and the wind turbines of the world. They also control most of the materials needed to make batteries for those electric cars. Michael Schellenberger is one of the few people who sees the big picture here and the details. He's the author of Apocalypse Never. He joins us tonight. Michael Schellenberger, thanks so much for coming on. So the rest of us just sort of noticed that groceries are a lot more expensive and gas is up and heating oil's unobtainable. You see, I think, what's really going on here. This is a much bigger movement, really, that's been thought through.
Well, that's right. It's good to be with you, Tucker. And I mean, the evidence is in. We've been experimenting now with renewables for a couple of decades. You know, China controls 90% of the market for rare earths, and wind, solar, and batteries require 700% more rare earths than conventional fuels. So moving towards wind, solar, and batteries is a recipe for making ourselves dependent on Chinese energy. When we are rich in natural gas and oil, our natural gas actually reduced the price of energy over the last 2 decades. It reduced our carbon emissions. Natural gas is a blessing that President Biden is boasting about shutting down. You may remember that right before the election, he shouted, "No more drilling" at a New York rally. So yeah, this is an effort to enrich a small number of global elites at the expense of the American people. And in terms of the ESG, the criteria of environment, social governance, nothing is worse than solar panels made in China. They're made by enslaved Uyghur Muslims. They make electricity in the United States expensive, and they make us dependent on China.
Once you say it that way, you realize that they don't have arguments, they only have force, and that's why they have to call you a denier, suggesting that you're immoral and crazy, because they don't have anything to say to that, as you know, because you live it. Michael Schellenberger, as always, a voice of wisdom. I appreciate it.
Good to be with you.
So the ESG/global warming agenda is part of the reason our economy is tanking. The other part is Ukraine. We are pushing, in fact, engaging in a hot war with Russia at this moment, which has upended energy prices around the world and is getting worse. The U.S. Congress has somehow earmarked more than $90 billion to Ukraine just this year. That's double what we spent annually in Afghanistan. That's far more than Russia's entire annual military budget. But it's still not enough for the president of Ukraine, Zelensky. He doesn't ask the U.S. Congress for money. He demands it. Here he is over the last 3 months. Watch this.
We absolutely need the United States to show leadership and give Ukraine the air defense system. But believe me, it's not even nearly enough to cover the civilian infrastructure, schools, hospitals, universities, homes of Ukrainians.
We have two key financial needs of the country. That's $38 billion to make up for the deficit of our budget for next year, and other $17 billion that were verified by the World Bank and needed to rebuild the critical infrastructure.
We would really like for the support, especially the amount of support, to stay the same, and to have this joint support from the US society and above all US taxpayers, because at the end of the day this is not the money of the government but the money of the people.
Do you know that guy? Who is that guy? He's some Ukrainian corrupt strongman, really? And he's demanding money from us? The gall of that guy. Where does he get off? L. Todd Wood is the founder of CD Media and a former special operations pilot. He joins us today. Todd, thanks so much for coming on. So the question of Zelensky is, where does he get this attitude? He's not a supplicant. He is someone who's demanding the U.S. Congress fund his government, not just his war, but the salaries of his bureaucrats. Like, where does he get this attitude?
Look, Zelensky was brought to power by an oligarch named Ihor Kolomoisky, which he recently went after and targeted for persecution in Ukraine. So that tells me something, that Zelensky now has a bigger and more important and more powerful and more rich benefactor, and that being the Biden administration, the World Economic Forum, and the cabal that's pushing all this agenda on the United States. So Zelensky is not working for the people of Ukraine. They're suffering massively. You know, we have had a team on the ground since Maidan in 2014, and we're being told now for months, they're saying, where is all this aid that's supposed to be coming here? We're not seeing anything. We're having teams having to go into Poland with our own funds and buy food for the people, buy medical supplies. A large percentage of the Ukrainian population right now has no water or electricity or heat going into the winter. Think about that. And a lot of them in these high-rise, Soviet-built buildings. So it's really a disaster. Zelensky is working for a bigger agenda, not for the Ukrainian people, that's for sure.
So $90 billion, there's been no audit of where that money went. Democrats in the Congress are fighting an audit. Why wouldn't they want to know?
Well, because approximately, you got to realize this is the varsity team of money launderers in Ukraine. We're estimating that only 30% of the supplies and military aid is actually getting to where it needs or is supposed to go. There's been evidence, which we talked about on your show recently, of a plane crash in Greece where arms were being shipped overseas. And so this money is not getting where it's supposed to go. A lot of this money is going to offshore. We're talking about homes. There's credible reports that a lot of these Ukrainian officials have bought property offshore. They don't want peace. They want the money train to continue for the defense contractors in the U.S. And I'm fascinated to see what's going to happen when the House gets taken over by the GOP, and hopefully this money train stops. So we'll see.
I hope so. And then you see decent, reasonable, conservative people, nice people like Joni Ernst, backing this. I mean, a lot of Republicans need to wake up and understand they've been had in a very profound way. L. Todd Wood, I appreciate you coming on tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So home ownership is obviously the key to the American dream. You own your little piece of the country. Unfortunately, it's now out of reach for a lot of people. The number of home sales has not been this low since Lehman Brothers collapsed. So what is happening to housing markets? We should probably know. We'll find out next. So if you're running the Fed, the two things you're afraid of course, are inflation and slower growth, and they're on opposite sides. We now have inflation, so the Fed is raising rates. And as a result, getting a mortgage is now very difficult for a lot of people, impossible for some, for millions of Americans. And the housing market looks like it's about to melt down. Grown men who are on the verge of moving out will be living with their parents for years to come if this continues. So it's a real problem. The question is, how do you fix it? Charlie Gasparino covers this stuff and much more. He's a senior correspondent at Fox Business, covered this business world for many decades, joins us tonight. Charlie, thanks for coming on. So
Anytime,
what do you do about this?
You know, I think the only thing left to do right now is what the Fed is doing. And it created a bubble in all sorts of risky assets, from crypto. As you know, crypto is imploding, to meme stocks. And housing was one of those assets that it helped propel to even, greater heights. And this is kind of what happened during the 2008 financial crisis. I don't think the banks are impaired as they were back then, but banks lent out money because money was free, and it was free created by the Fed. And amid all this, you have, listen, housing prices went up dramatically. I know housing prices went up 100% in certain areas of the South, South Carolina, Florida.
Yeah.
Now, there's a logic to that. These are lower tax places that people from New York were moving to, but also there was a speculation at level here that hasn't been seen before. That has to pop, and that froth has to go away. But what I think is going to make it even worse when this thing, continues to unravel, is the fact that you don't have a lot of natural buyers from grown men who are living with their mother. I mean, it's a meme that people talk about. You live with your mom. And in Italy, I have family in Italy. They call them mammonis. These older guys living with their mom into their 30s and 40s. But it's real, and it has an economic impact, and you'll see it with housing.
So is there anything, but on the other side, you've got inflation, which everyone's afraid of for very good reasons. So what do? You don't want meme stocks to blow up, but you want housing to stay reasonable, but not tank. Like, it's tough.
It's a balancing act, and it's all done by the Fed, and they dug us into this hole where there are pockets of speculative bubbles. And yes, meme stocks are one of those. Crypto is one of those. As we know, they're collapsing as we speak here. And in certain pockets of the country, so is housing. Like I said, there was a rush to buy houses in all these places, fueled by the pandemic, fueled by restrictions in the Northeast and in California, but also fueled by the Fed. And the only way to get rid of that is pain, and the pain is going to be lower housing prices and people's net worths going down, unfortunately, for a while until this thing gets sorted out.
It would be nice to have an economy that was driven by productivity and not money printing. Ideally.
That is a nirvana. You would think that we would have learned that from the financial crisis, where everything was built on financial engineering and derivatives.
Right.
And here we are again.
And here we are again. And you're getting to cover both. Charlie Gasparino, thank you so much for that.
Anytime.
Good to see you. The state of Texas has one of the biggest natural gas reserves on the planet, and yet somehow last year the state of Texas ran out of energy. Why'd that happen exactly? Too little time has been spent ruminating on that. Well, leaders in Texas relied on so-called renewables like windmills, which sound great, it's certainly fashionable, and all your friends think it's cool, but they don't really work during windstorms, for example. And in Texas they failed, and people died as a result. So for an episode of our documentary series, we went to Texas to see what this problem looked like firsthand. Here's part of what we found. Carlson tonight. So if you've been watching the news recently, the one thing you know for certain about the accused gunman in the massacre in Colorado over the weekend is that he was a crazed right-wing anti-trans extremist. This is a man who was radicalized by this show and by the Twitter account Libs of TikTok to hate transgendered people. And that's why this man walked into a gay bar with a gun and started murdering people. He did that because he was taught by right-wing media outlets to despise and fear the non-binary community. And that's why this show and Libs of TikTok must be hauled into court and bankrupted for what we've done so that we can never provoke this kind of horrifying violence ever again. That's the real lesson of this mass shooting. So that is what they've been telling you again and again and again on various news channels for the past 3 days. And we're not overstating that, by the way. Here's a selection of it.
It's a campaign being driven by members of Congress and conservative influencers on social media, as well as the right's most favorite TV network, Fox News.
Those incidents at drag events I mentioned a few moments ago, they happened within the context of conservative media personalities fear-mongering against queer folks.
Respected messengers from TV networks saying that these people are wrong and they're trying to damage your children.
We have a long history of the LGBTQ community being victimized, demonized by especially right-wing media and Republicans.
You have anti-LGBTQ rhetoric spewed on the most watched hours on Fox News at a regular clip against the U.S. military, against gay men and women, against gay teachers, against their right to exist.
So Fox News, in its most watched hours, is attacking even the U.S. military and, of course, gay men and women and teachers, too. They're advocating, quote, against their right to exist. In other words, they've been calling for genocide. That would be us. Now, that's a stout claim, but no one has made it more often than NBC News. In particular, its two self-described disinformation reporters, Ben Collins and Brandy Zadrozny. These two are outraged that anyone would dare criticize the genital mutilation of children, or drag shows for fifth graders, or creepy weirdo teachers explaining the mechanics of oral sex to 9-year-olds. Pointing out that any of that is happening is hate, and it gets people killed. Here's a highly emotional Ben Collins of NBC News making that very point yesterday morning.
Am I doing something wrong here? Here are some headlines that I wrote for the last 6 months. Fueled by internet's far-right machine, anti-LGBTQ threats shut down trans rights and drag events. Remember, there was a drag event happening in Colorado.
Well, what do we do about public officials at local level, state level, federal level, who try to inject the fear of the very word transgender into school issues?
They get more clicks for it, and they end up on Tucker Carlson. They end up on the highest-rated show on cable news. And last night, by the way, Tucker attacked my colleague, Brandy Zadrozny, who was co-byline on almost all of these stories. Not me. He attacked Brandy, of course. But he attacked Brandy. And he went right back into this idea that some they is trying to groom your kids, trying to sexualize your children, right?
Yeah.
Who's the they, first of all?
Yeah.
And second of all of her reporting was right. All of it was right.
Oh, it's all about me, of course, says Ben Collins. But more to the point, how dare anyone criticize the august disinformation reporter and former college librarian, Brandy Zadrozny, because, as Ben Collins pointed out, her reporting was right. Well, since you brought it up, Ben Collins, was her reporting right? Well, not entirely. Do you remember when Brandy Zadrozny told you several hundred times that the accused shooter, Anderson Lee Aldrich, was inspired by hatred for the non-binary community that he learned on this show? Do you remember that? Well, actually, it turns out, we discovered last night, that Anderson Lee Aldrich is, drumroll please, part of the non-binary community. He doesn't hate them, he is one. In a court filing, Aldrich's lawyers wrote this, quote, Anderson Aldrich is non-binary. They use they-them pronouns, and for the purposes of all formal filings will be addressed as Mix Aldrich. Mix Aldrich. That's the shooter, the non-binary shooter. Let that sink in. First, get your chuckling under control and ponder what this means. What it means is that virtually everything that NBC News has told you about this shooting in Colorado is not only wrong, it is the opposite of the truth. It is all a grotesque and filthy lie. It wasn't news reporting. It turns out to have been the most transparent sort of political propaganda. And for once, they have been busted flat out in public trying to sell political propaganda to an unsuspecting public under the guise of news. It's not the first time they've done it. They won't stop doing it. Oh, but they did it a lot in this case. Here's another clip, another instance of Ben Collins trying to once again pass off political slogans as news.
There are 5 dead people in a strip mall because that was the only place they felt safe as gay or trans people in this town in Colorado Springs.
He's emotional telling you that. There are 5 dead people in a strip mall because that was the only place they felt safe as gay or trans people in this town of Colorado Springs. So it turns out it's the town's fault, too, because there are a lot of Christians, everybody knows, in Colorado Springs. So gay people feel terrified there because Christians are dangerous. And all these terrified gay people were huddled together for safety when this Fox News-addled anti-trans bigot walked in and started shooting them for being trans folk. That was Ben Collins' quote, reporting. Well, the only problem is not all the victims were gay. At least one of them was at the club with his girlfriend. Oh, details. Ben Collins doesn't let details get in the way of an effective political attack. And it would have been an effective political attack had not reality interceded. But he doesn't care. Now there's the White House. Here's the White House telling you that because a non-binary person shut up a gay bar, you can't own a gun.
This attack also comes amidst a rise in violent rhetoric and threats against the LGBTQI+ people across the country. While we don't know yet for certain the motive of this attack, hate has no place in this country, and neither do military-style assault rifles, which is why we will continue to push for an assault weapons ban.
Oh, of course, it makes sense. You following the reasoning? So when the trans community opens fire on itself, we need an assault weapons ban because why? Because you're a hater. Pete Buttigieg, of course, couldn't pass up a moment like this. It's not like Pete Buttigieg wants to talk about how things are going over at the transportation department, which he supposedly runs. Short answer, not well. No, Pete Buttigieg wants to talk about identity. He always wants to talk about identity. And the funny, ironic thing is, until just a few years ago, Buttigieg wouldn't even admit that he was gay. He hid that and then lied about it for reasons he has never been asked to explain. Why not? But whatever. Now he is happy to use his sexual orientation as a cudgel to bash you repeatedly in the face into submission. Quote, here's the latest. If you're a politician or media figure who sets up the LGBTQ community to be hated and feared, not because any of us have ever harmed you, but because you find it useful, then don't you dare act surprised when this kind of violence follows. Don't you dare act surprised. Don't you dare. All right, fair enough, we won't dare. But honestly, we're a little surprised to learn that the anti-trans shooter is himself trans. Were you surprised by that, Pete Buttigieg? Now that you're admitting you're gay after lying about it? Since we're talking about identity, what do you have to say about that? Well, nothing, weirdly. Pete Buttigieg hasn't said anything. Nor has he apologized for attacking other people on false pretenses. Guess who else hasn't apologized? Ben Collins or Brandy Zadrozny. Yesterday, they were accusing us of getting 5 people murdered. Now that the story they were telling has turned out to be a lie, the opposite of what they said it was, they're pretending that nothing has changed at all. Oh, they are liars. Cold-blooded liars. It's amazing to watch. And so's the company they work for. NBC News just ran this article after we know that the shooter was himself trans. They ran this headline with a straight face. Quote, right-wing influencers and media doubled down on anti-LGBTQ rhetoric in the wake of the Colorado shooting. Can you imagine writing that, knowing what we know? They had no problem with it. Then an editor at NBC called Benjamin Goggin added this, quote, if the shooter is non-binary, it doesn't change the fact the right-wing media is continuing to stoke hatred towards LGBTQ people after 5 people were killed at a gay bar. Right. So it's hatred. So if you're against genital mutilation of children or bringing toddlers to drag shows, you're against the LGBTQ community. Well, of course, that's insane. There's nothing anti-gay about that. Most gay people aren't in favor of genital mutilation or bringing toddlers to drag shows. There's nothing wrong with those opinions. They're the right opinions, and all decent people understand that. What is indecent, what is wrong, is lying about a mass shooting, which NBC did. So how are the rest of the media handling this? Well, CNN, for its part, is just denying that the shooter is really non-binary. Couldn't be. It couldn't be. It just couldn't be true. So they've decided to continue misgendering Mix Aldrich. Watch this.
Attorneys for the accused shooter, Anderson Lee Aldrich, say in new court filings tonight that the suspect now identifies as non-binary. In a footnote to a motion asserting legal privileges, the public defenders say, quote, Anderson Aldrich is non-binary. They use they, them pronouns. Are you guys lawyers? I mean, you know, I don't know if I don't know what to say about that. I mean, that's what he's now saying.
It sounds like they're trying to prepare a defense against a hate crimes charge.
Oh, so in this case, if the shooter claims to be non-binary, he's got to be lying about it. It's not real. So we're not going to call the non-binary shooter Mix or observe his pronoun request. In fact, the whole pronoun thing is gone. Biology is back. He was born a man. He's still a man. Oh, it's unbelievable. So what they're doing, of course, is using an actual tragedy, the murder of 5 people, for political reasons. And of course, it's not the first time they have done that. They're happy to use death for political advantage. They did it with George Floyd. They did it with Officer Brian Sicknick. And it's not the most recent anti-gay attack, by the way, that has turned out to be a total lie perpetuated by the media. Just a few days ago, a guy was caught throwing a rock at a gay bar in Hell's Kitchen, New York, on camera. So the media dutifully went out and interviewed the owner, who said, quote, "It feels like yet another manifestation of hate against our community." A lot of big social media accounts ran with that story. More hate, more hate. So then, and this is a story that didn't get quite as much coverage, the police arrested the guy who did it. His name is Sean Cullion, and he was upset because of a dispute involving a friend. He didn't target the place because it's a gay bar. In fact, and we're quoting now from the rock thrower, "I'm gay myself." I mean, come on. Shouldn't someone apologize? Shouldn't someone admit that they got the facts wrong and slandered half the country on the basis of wrong facts? No, never admit it, never apologize. Keep moving on. Pick another story to beat you over the head with. So Matt Walsh has been following these stories. He has been repeatedly attacked by name by NBC News for his dangerous anti-trans, murder-inspiring bigotry. We wanted to see how he's holding up in the face of that. Matt Walsh, great to see you tonight. You were called out repeatedly by name, not just some guy, but Matt Walsh. Matt Walsh is responsible for this mass murder. Now that we learned what we learned last night, how do you assess this?
Well, I mean, we're all owed apologies, but I'm not going to. I've seen these people enough to know that I'm not going to sit around holding my breath waiting for the apology. I think it's just a really kind of amazing to watch, especially that clip you played of CNN, where they immediately just deny this person's self-identity. And I think that the point that we want to get across is that if you're on the left, okay, you can't do that. That is not available to you. You're not allowed to do that by your own precedent, by your own philosophy, you know, by the rules that you have set, and we're going to hold you to them. Now, you and I, Tucker, we're allowed to say about this mass shooter who calls himself non-binary, we're allowed to say, that's nonsense. I don't care. Non-binary isn't even a thing. You can't even be that. But on the left, they've made it clear that the only evidence that needs to be provided in order to prove that someone is non-binary is that they say it. And what they've also told us repeatedly is that the idea that somebody would adopt one of these identities, you know, in a self-serving way, like, for example, a convicted male felon who's in prison who all of a sudden discovers his inner female identity, to speculate that maybe he's doing that so he could have access to female inmates in women's prisons. We're told that, you can't speculate that. That's an awful thing to even suggest. So that's them saying that, which means that they're stuck with this. I mean, as far as they're concerned, this person is non-binary. Now, what is he actually? I don't know. I think it's pretty clear he's just a crazy guy. That's what actually happened. And the other point I want to make here is that what we need to realize with the left-wing media is that when there's a mass shooting, if we don't know everything about the person's life, and we haven't seen all of their social media posts within the first 2 hours after the shooting, it almost always means that this is not a right-winger. Like, if it's a right-winger who committed the attack, we're going to know everything about them immediately. But it was very suspicious and conspicuous that up until 2-3 days passed, and we knew almost nothing about this guy. All we had was the speculation from the media, and then this shoe drops telling us that, actually, he identifies as non-binary. So that's not a coincidence. They gave themselves time, right, to get their preferred narrative out before the truth got out.
Well, that's exactly right. And in fact, all of this speculation, all of it wrong, has taken place before we had any real facts about this guy. In fact, I think we just got the first video of the shooter, and I want to put it on the screen now. I haven't even seen this. Here it is.
Could the defendant please state his name? Anderson Aldrich, did you watch the video concerning your constitutional rights in this case?
Yes.
Do you have any questions about those rights?
No.
And not for the first time, I think, watching video of an accused mass shooter, why are we ignoring the potential role of pharmaceuticals in this? I mean, that guy's impaired in some way, and we find that not in all mass shooters, but an awful lot are on some kind of prescribed psychiatric medication, but we're not allowed to talk about that because we take ads from Pfizer or something? Why does no one ever say this?
Yeah, that's one of the things that makes it so unfortunate, to put it mildly, that the left is determined to politicize these things immediately and use it as political ammunition, because what it means is that we can't have any actual needed conversation about why this stuff happens. Like, as you point out, pharmaceuticals. Also, one of the few details we know about this guy is that he comes from a broken home. His mother's has warrants out for her arrest. His father is estranged. He's like a porn star, drug smuggler. I mean, he comes from this tumultuous, totally broken home, which of course doesn't begin to excuse it, but it does. Of course not. It does indicate that when kids are raised in these kinds of environments, it makes it much more likely that they're going to lash out violently. That's a conversation we should really be having about the effects of broken homes and the disintegration of the nuclear family and how that contributes to violence. But we can't talk about any of that because as soon as the left realizes that they can't use it for their political advantage, we don't talk about it anymore, and it just goes away. And that's why this story is going away as far as the media is concerned.
Yeah, Fox News, Second Amendment, Fox News, Second Amendment. I mean, it's very tired. Matt Walsh, let me apologize to you for all the attacks you have taken unfairly on this. Great to see you tonight.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
There was a deadly mass shooting last night in Virginia at a Walmart. Police have now identified the shooter in that case. Fox's Trace Gallagher has that story for us tonight. What the Biden administration has done at the southern border is a tragedy for the country. It's an attack on democracy, but it's also a disaster for dogs. Many dogs have been left behind at the border. There's now a scramble to save them before they die or are put down. We're going to talk to someone who's working on saving them in just a minute. Plus, our border czar Kamala Harris is out and about, not at the border, of course. She's headed overseas to find people who like her. Hasn't found that yet, but she's produced some amazing video. We'll show you in just a moment. What do you say we check in with our border czar, shall we? Who it turns out is nowhere near our border. Instead, Kamala Harris is overseas. Yesterday, she was spotted in a fishing village in the Philippines looking at fish. That's like a perfect job for her. You know, sometimes it takes until midlife to find the thing that you really were born to do. Staring at fish in a foreign country, hello, hello, perfect for her. But as our border czar inspects fish in the Philippines, we have a very real crisis here. Animal shelters overflowing with dogs that illegal aliens have ditched at the border. And it really is a tragedy. Lori Simons runs the Big Dog Ranch Rescue. She joins us tonight. Lori, thank you so much for calling our attention to this and for doing something about it. So describe quickly, if you would, the nature of the problem.
Thank you, Tucker. Thank you, Tucker, for helping me bring this to light. It's a huge problem. When we got down to Eagle Pass down at the Rio Grande last week and saw hundreds and hundreds of starving and abandoned dogs left to fend for themselves from illegal immigrants that cross the border with their dogs, then they get on buses and just leave them behind. These dogs can't survive on their own, and the National Guard and a friend of mine from Blue Line Moving, who had gone down there to do a border cleanup, had reached out to us, and we were really shocked at just how big the problem was and how much these animals were suffering. And this couldn't come at a worse time, Tucker. Shelters throughout the country are overflowing everywhere. Owner surrenders are up 60% throughout the country because people are having to make the hard choice of whether to feed their families and fill up their car with gas and heat their homes, or give up their dog. They just can't afford to care for them.
Well, first of all, I would say anyone who would abandon a dog at the border should not be allowed in this country and should be deported immediately. We don't want people like that living here at all. Second, how can Amen. It's really a sign of low character, in my opinion. So how can our viewers help? You are running an effort to save these dogs who did nothing wrong and were abandoned. How can people help?
Well, Big Dog Ranch Rescue is the largest no-kill dog rescue in the country, with our Palm Beach County location, we have 750 dogs there right now. We're overflowing, trying to rescue so many. And just opened an Alabama location. You can please come adopt one of these dogs. There's so many that needs home. Or donate. Donations keep us going. Go to our website at bdrr.org and help us save more lives.
Appreciate you doing this and for also telling us about it. Lori Simons, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Tucker.
So you're not allowed to acknowledge that there are a lot of people, many thousands of people across the world who have suffered severe side effects from the COVID vaccine, which they were forced to take. We're going to speak to one woman who has, including blindness. She joins us next.
Welcome to Fox News Live. I'm Trace Gallagher in Los Angeles. 6 people are dead, 6 others wounded following a mass shooting at a Walmart in Virginia. A manager at the Walmart pulled out a gun before a routine employee meeting and began firing wildly around the break room. Police believe that some 50 people were in the store when the shooting took place. The gunman was found dead when police arrived at the scene. They are still searching for a motive. An eyewitness to the shooting at an LGBTQ club in Colorado Springs earlier this week. The suspect showed no hesitation, the man says, when he entered the club. The witness says the suspect wore body armor and began firing towards people at the bar and on the dance floor. Authorities say 5 people were killed, 17 others wounded by the gunfire. The suspect is being held without bail following an initial court appearance earlier today. I'm Trace Gallagher. See you on Fox News at night. Now back to Tucker Carlson.
There remains in place a complete media blackout on this story, but the data are clear. For many people, many of whom were forced to take the COVID vaccine, the shot has been physically dangerous. It has caused heart inflammation of many thousands of people, killed thousands of people around the world. In fact, the vaccine does not appear to do much about this version of COVID either. People who've taken the vaccine now constitute a majority of COVID deaths. In the face of these numbers, this is not speculation, it's not a conspiracy theory. These are numbers from the United States, from Israel, from the UK, from governments that keep track of it. Tony Fauci was asked about it. He denied that the vaccines are dangerous in any way, which is a lie. Watch this.
So let's just talk very briefly about what we know about the vaccines, because we want to make our decisions really based on facts, evidence, and data. Are the vaccines safe? That keeps coming up. Clearly, an extensive body of information clearly indicates that they're safe.
That's not true. Pfizer's own clinical trials show that they're not safe. More people have been injured by this vaccine, the mandatory vaccine, than by all vaccines administered in the United States over the past 30 years combined. So you never hear that, and you never hear from people who were injured. Danielle Roskowski says she was. She said she suffered very serious reactions to the Pfizer vaccine, including blindness in one eye, nerve damage, organ damage, and more. She joins us now. Danielle, thank you so much for coming on. What happened to you after you took this shot? Why did you take the shot? Were you pushed into taking it? Did you take it voluntarily? And how did your doctors respond?
Hi, Tucker. Thank you so much for having me on, and I really hope that my story can help impact others. And to answer your questions, I was not forced to take the Pfizer vaccine. I elected to take the vaccine because I thought that it was safe and effective, and I believed our nation's leaders when they told us that. But unfortunately, as you know, safe and effective is not for everyone. So since taking the Pfizer vaccine, I had over 200 tubes of blood drawn, 150 different medical appointments, everything from a sural nerve and calf biopsy to angiograms of my eyes, which proved that I had actually had blood clots in my eyes, which caused permanent vision loss. So I don't have blindness. It's very blurry, but I can still see out of my eye. Additionally, my husband and I were actually told by NYU Fertility that this has impacted our fertility and that we would probably have to freeze our embryos due to potential pregnancy complications down the line.
It's just so heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking to hear this and to see that you are not allowed to say that on any other channel that I'm aware of in this country. There's a blackout on this. Your story is not welcome in public, period, which I find very upsetting. How have doctors been with you? How many doctors have been willing to concede this could be from the vaccine?
So doctors, it has been a really long path in finding adequate medical care. So when this first happened, doctors didn't really know what was going on. And a lot of them, did not say that it was the vaccine. However, the current critical care team that I do have in place does believe that it was all caused from the vaccine, especially as more information is coming out about the repercussions of the vaccines and, the 9 pages of side effects that, the Pfizer documents have kind of revealed. It's kind of a consensus now that this did happen from the vaccine. And I'm really fortunate and blessed because I was able to find a doctor, his name is Dr. Jordan Vaughn, who works specifically with the vaccine-injured community. So he was able to kind of figure out a little bit more about what was going on with me.
You have such a gentle attitude, and your kindness resonates. I don't know if I would feel that way if I were you. Those documents you refer to, the side effects that Pfizer conceded at the very beginning, those have been available since the vaccine rolled out almost 2 years ago. Why didn't you know about them? Did you know about those side effects, potential side effects, when you took this shot?
No, I didn't know about the side effects. So when I was, waiting to take the shot, I was pretty much probably like most Americans. I don't believe that I had informed consent because I didn't know. I took the shot February, so it was quite early on because I work with students. So and having a background in teaching, I wanted to get the shot as soon as I possibly could.
Yeah.
And thank you for telling me that I had that sort of gentle and kind, attitude about me. It wasn't always the case. I was really angry after all of these side effects started happening to me. Yeah. But I wanted to take that sort of anger and channel it. Yeah.
Well, bless you for doing that. I'm so you're the injured party, not me. So I'm sorry to throw my anger on you. It's just that the fact that you can't say this in public in most places is so distressing. And I know it takes bravery to admit you've been injured by doing something they told you to do. But I know that takes bravery, so I appreciate your doing it tonight. Danielle, Godspeed.
Thank you. And so thank you so much, Tucker. If I can just say that there are a couple of really great resources out there for the vaccine injured that I wish I knew about sooner. So the Frontline Critical COVID Care Alliance, that's run by Dr. Pierre Corey, and he works with the vaccine injured as well. Additionally, react19.org and realnotrare.org are really wonderful websites for the vaccine injured community, so they can be game changers.
Thank you for telling us that. Danielle, good to see you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Tucker.
So you've been told for decades now that there's no downside to affirmative action. Everybody wins. And in this country, after the Civil Rights Movement, you can't fire someone because of his skin color. What's the point of the Civil Rights Movement if you can do that? Oh, but they're doing that. And a senior government official in California was just fired, and everyone admits it because he had the wrong skin color. Does Barack Obama know this? He's against that, right? He hasn't said a word. Why is that? We'll discuss it next. A man called John Arntz has been the director of elections in the city of San Francisco for 2 decades. Before Arntz took over, elections in this city were a bad joke. People would routinely find ballot boxes floating in San Francisco Bay. So Arntz cleaned up the whole election process, and no one really denies that. But this week, San Francisco's Elections Commission fired John Arntz. Why? Well, they did it because he had the wrong skin color, and they admit it. As Elections Commission President Chris Jordonek told Arntz, quote, "Our decision wasn't about your performance, but after 20 years, we wanted to take action on the city's racial equity plan." So that's illegal. You're not allowed to fire people in the United States under federal law and state law in every state because of their skin color. And we have an entire civil rights division at the Justice Department that exists to prevent things like this from happening. And we had an entire civil rights movement designed to make sure that people were never fired because of their skin color. And yet no one's saying a word. Barack Obama, Jonathan Greenblatt of the ADL, our self-appointed moral Superman, the NAACP, not a word. No one's paid them to complain yet. Bob Woodson experienced firsthand the civil rights movement. He's founder and president of the Woodson Center. He joins us now. Mr. Woodson, thank you so much for coming on. So if you wind up in a place where it's...
Tucker.
Well, of course, because you've just seen both ends of this. If you wind up back in a country where it's okay to say, I'm firing you because of the way you look, it kind of seems like maybe the last 60 years were for nothing.
It really does, Tucker. It's insulting and it's degrading. In fact, what progressives are doing, they have hijacked the rich legacy of the civil rights movement and using it as a bludgeon against the values of this nation, when in fact it was those same values that enabled Black America to survive slavery and discrimination. In one sense, we are worse off now in the last 50 years than we have the first 100 years after doing Jim Crow, because the crisis facing America is one of values. It is not race.
Well, and of course, the civil rights movement was driven by and led by faithful Christians, Christian ministers. And that whole component, and of course, slavery was abolished by Christian ministers. I never hear that. It's been like completely flipped on its head.
No, you really don't. And you know, I make the case when they just denigrate the nuclear family and also Christian faith. You know, there's a test that I try to apply to people. If you are run out of gas at 10 o'clock at night in a high crime neighborhood and the gas station is 2 blocks away, and you have the option of confronting 2 groups of people, 10 men who came around the corner and they had just left the bar, and 10 other men who came around just left Bible study, which group would you want to confront? Even atheists don't name their children Judas. And so people instinctively know that these values are important. And when we're talking about violence and the disorganization that exists in our centers, Tucker, it doesn't exist all over. If you were to go to religious enclaves in this country, you will see that there is order, there is respect for family. You don't see drug addiction, out of wedlock births. And if you go to any Orthodox Jewish, Muslim, or Christian community like the United, and you will see these values that enabled Black America to survive slavery and discrimination still in place. But we don't focus on the value component of these communities and the fact that there are healing agents there that have the capacity to transform and redeem these communities. But what we're up against is the race grievance industry, and they have hijacked, they demonize the family, they demonize our Christian values, and that's why what the Woodson Center is doing, we are pushing back because we must de-racialize race. And these civil rights leaders are complicit in their silence. But I saw a white woman with a Black Lives Matter T-shirt on beating a black woman, pushing a baby because she was in a Trump rally. And yet the civil rights leaders were silent about that.
I know. I'm sorry to laugh. It's so grotesque. It's unbelievable. Bob Woodson, who has seen it all. Great to see you tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
Amir Farsood is a Canadian, lives in Ontario. Recently he found he couldn't afford to pay rent. He became homeless. That's how he considered a legitimate justification in Canada that is now considered justification for being killed by doctors, physician-assisted euthanasia. And actually, a doctor signed off on Farsood's application for, quote, medically assisted death. Fortunately, news of the story spread. Farsood raised 60 grand on a GoFundMe account and decided not to kill himself. So whether that was a scam or not, the point is a doctor signed off on killing a guy because he couldn't afford rent? A new federal law in Canada will allow euthanasia for the mentally ill beginning in March of next year. That's not a Nazi move or anything. Well, actually, it is. It's shocking. Dr. Mark Siegel joins us tonight to assess. So, Dr. Siegel, after the Second World War, there was a lot of thought put into how can we prevent the medical establishment, which has all this power, from going completely off the rails as it did in Europe in the 30s and killing weak people. And yet we seem to have forgotten all those lessons, and now we're seeing it again. What is this?
Tucker, it's not just the homeless, and you said the mentally ill. At the program north of the border, which I'm always afraid is going to spread somewhere, is medical assistance in dying. Euphemism, right? Started off in 2016, 1,000 deaths. It's 31,000 total so far. 10,000 last year alone, thousands of physicians participating. And by the way, Ammar Farsood didn't just have a homeless problem, he's got a severe back problem. So they're labeling him severely disabled, and I'm wondering if it wasn't such long waiting lines in Canada, maybe he could have his back taken care of instead of somebody putting him on this list and him looking to end his life. And adding the mentally ill to this is even more tragic. And thank God for the GoFundMe page that a total stranger, Effie, saw this on a news broadcast and raised $60,000 to reinstitute him at home, not to help his back, by the way, and he decided against suicide. But my question, Tucker, is actually physician-assisted suicide. My question is, how many thousands out there don't have that GoFundMe page, don't have that news coverage, are waiting for this? How tragic. And the mentally ill, when you consider that both the back problem and mental health is treatable with the right kind of physician, with someone with the right attitude. Now, here's how I define being a physician: prolonging life and relieving suffering. And there's a lot of people out there that agree with me, and that might have saved the 31,000 people rather than having them go to their death. But an even higher authority, Tucker, Rabbi Beryl Bell spoke to Fox Digital, and he's up in Montreal, and he says it's our Creator who knows when to end life. Our Creator, Tucker. Happy Thanksgiving.
I'm on his side, for sure. Mark Siegel. Doctor, thank you so much. We'll be right back.
Thanks, Tucker.